Hey there, tonight we're unraveling the world of weaving in ancient Andean civilizations, where the truth is those vibrant textiles were once worth more than gold, and likely saw more gossip threads than any social media feed today. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now settle in, maybe turn on some white noise or grab your favorite blanket, and let's drift into tonight's story together. You wake up in the brisk morning air of an ancient Andean village, and instead of reaching for your smartphone, you're reaching for a spindle. Welcome to the textile capital of the ancient world, where weaving is not just a skill. It's a way of life, a cultural cornerstone, and quite frankly, a currency more valuable than Bitcoin could ever dream to be. Before you even think about breakfast, you've got to understand the intricate dance of warp and weft. These aren't just terms thrown around by hipster artisans. They're the backbone of a society that wove its very identity into the fabric they created. Alpacas and llamas are your co-workers today. Their fibers are the raw material, the bread and butter, or perhaps quinoa and chicha of Andean society. Alpaca fleece is like the ancient Peruvian version of cashmere, soft, luxurious, and a real status symbol. Meanwhile, llama wool is the sturdy workhorse fiber, perfect for those heavy-duty textiles meant for everyday life in the harsh Andean climate. It's like the difference between a designer silk scarf and your trusty pair of levies. Both have their place, and both are essential to your work today. As you set up your backstrap loom, basically an ancient ergonomic workstation tied to a tree or post, consider this. The Andean people were not just making clothes. They were crafting history. Textiles were used to communicate social status, political power, and even spiritual beliefs. You couldn't just pop into a local market and barter with coins. Textiles were often the currency of choice. Forget about the Incan Empire's lack of a written language. Who needs words when you've got patterns that speak volumes? The sheer number of colors you have at your disposal is staggering. Natural dyes from plants, minerals, and even insects allow for a palette that would make a modern artist weep with envy. Cochineal, a bug native to Peru, produces a red dye so vibrant that it would become a hot commodity in Europe centuries later. Just imagine, little critters crawling around, unknowingly laying the groundwork for an international trade sensation. And if you're feeling bold, there are over 30 different hues you can achieve just from mixing and matching these natural ingredients. It's like having the world's first Pantone collection at your fingertips. Now, let's talk economics. While the rest of the world was busy hoarding gold and silver, the Andean civilizations were putting their wealth into textiles. A finely woven tunic, known as a cambai, could take months to produce and was worth more than its weight in precious metals. Even the Spanish conquistadors, who generally had a one-track mind when it came to loot, were astounded by the value placed on these fabrics. Imagine Hernan Cortés seeing these textiles and thinking, wait, what do you mean this is better than gold? And there's a reason for this textile obsession beyond pure economics. Weaving was a social glue, binding communities together in a shared craft. It was a skill passed down through generations, a rite of passage, and a way to honor the gods. To be a skilled weaver was to hold a position of respect and influence. You were part of an elite, a creator of cultural identity, not just a producer of goods. As you continue weaving, you realize how these textiles play into the social and political fabric of the society. High-ranking officials and nobility wore garments that were elaborately decorated, signaling their place in the social hierarchy. Commoners, meanwhile, had more straightforward designs, but even these were crafted with care and precision. Each piece was a work of art with a story to tell, a testament to the individual's skill and the community's shared values. So, while you're here, sitting at your loom, remember that each thread you weave contributes to a legacy. You're not just creating a piece of clothing, you're participating in an ancient tradition that has shaped the Andean world for centuries. You're part of an economy that values craftsmanship over bullion, where the loom holds more power than the sword. And as the sun climbs higher, casting shadows that dance across the vibrant threads, you can't help but feel connected to those who came before you, each one leaving their mark in the warp and weft of history. The sun continues its upward climb, casting a golden glow over the Andean landscape, and with it, the political threads of these ancient textiles come into sharper focus. Let's unravel this tapestry of power, shall we? In the world of Andean diplomacy, a finely woven cloth could speak louder than any gilded tongue. Forget the idea of Incan fashionistas strutting around Cusco like it's the runway of Paris Fashion Week. The real story here isn't about glitz and glam. It's about strategy, alliances, and yes, a bit of showing off. You see, at the heart of it all, textiles were the ultimate status update and political tool rolled into one. When the Incas wanted to seal a deal or show their dominance, they didn't just send gold. No, they sent textiles that were worth more than their weight in any precious metal. These weren't just any fabrics. We're talking about campi, the creme de la creme of Incan textiles, made by specially trained artisans known as aclacuna, or chosen women. Imagine receiving a gift so valuable that even the Spanish conquistadors, who were practically blinded by their lust for gold, couldn't help but be impressed. Now, why would a piece of fabric hold so much sway? The answer lies in the unique Andean value system, one that prioritized skill and craftsmanship over shiny objects. A campi garment was a statement piece, a way to communicate respect, alliance, or even a subtle threat. It was a diplomatic handshake, a peace treaty, and a power play all woven into one. You could gift a tapestry to a rival leader, not just as a peace offering, but as a reminder of the superior skill and resources at your disposal. It was like handing over a business card that read, "We're better than you, but let's be friends." But let's debunk a persistent myth here. The idea of the Incas as a bunch of sartorial savants obsessed with the latest trends. The truth is, their fashion choices were less about personal style and more about political signaling. Sure, the garments were beautiful, but their real value lay in the message they conveyed. A gold nugget, while shiny and alluring, was ultimately just a chunk of metal. A tapestry, however, was a narrative, a woven story that could communicate loyalty, submission, or defiance without uttering a single word. Andean textiles also played a crucial role in the tribute systems that underpinned the empire's economy. Instead of paying taxes in the form of coins or bullion, subject peoples and regions contributed textiles, which were then redistributed by the state. This wasn't just about keeping the treasury stocked with fancy fabrics. It was a clever way to integrate different cultures into the empire, ensuring that everyone was quite literally on the same page, or in this case, the same thread. By weaving their own materials into the fabric of the empire, these communities were bound together in a shared socio-economic network. Now, let's talk numbers. An elite campi garment could take anywhere from 400 to 600 hours to produce. That's the equivalent of binge-watching the entire run of a long-running TV series, twice. And you thought your scarf knitting hobby was time-consuming. The labor-intensive nature of these textiles is what made them so valuable, and you didn't just toss one of these on the pile of tribute without a second thought. Each piece was a testament to the labor and resources invested by a community, and its presentation was often accompanied by ceremonies and rituals. This brings us to another myth, the idea that textile production was solely women's work. In reality, while women were often the primary weavers, men played key roles in the procurement of materials and the dyeing processes. The production of high-status textiles was a community effort, a collaborative venture that involved both genders and served to reinforce social bonds. Everyone had a hand in the loom, and everyone shared in the prestige. So, next time you picture the Incan elite, don't imagine them preening like peacocks in search of applause. Instead, see them as master tacticians, weaving their way through a complex web of diplomacy and power, with every thread and stitch serving a purpose beyond the aesthetic. As the day rolls on and the loom continues its rhythmic dance, remember that each piece of fabric was a silent yet powerful narrator of Andean history, chronicling tales of power, politics, and the eternal human quest for connection. As the afternoon sun casts its warm glow over the Andean landscape, it's time to dive into the heart of the weaving process itself, the backstrap loom. Ah, the backstrap loom. If there were an ancient equivalent of a standing desk, this would be it. It's a marvel of simplicity and efficiency, a tool that could transform a pile of fluffy alpaca fibers into a masterpiece of textile art. But let's be clear, this isn't the kind of magic you'd find in a Harry Potter novel. No, this is more like those YouTube videos where you watch someone painstakingly create a hyper-realistic pencil drawing, one meticulous stroke at a time. The genius of the backstrap loom lies in its design. It's a portable, adjustable contraption that allows the weaver to control the tension of the warp threads with just their body weight. Imagine strapping one end of your loom to a post, tree, or even the leg of a particularly patient llama, while the other end is secured around your back. Then you sit on the ground, legs stretched out, ready to create a tapestry that could make a modern-day textile designer sob into their mood board. The process begins with setting up the warp threads. Think of them as the skeleton of your fabric. This part is crucial because, without a strong backbone, your textile is doomed to become a floppy mess. Once the warp is in place, it's time to weave in the weft threads using a shuttle, a small, smooth tool that makes the whole ordeal slightly less labor-intensive. But don't let the simplicity fool you. This is no walk in the park. Weaving on a backstrap loom requires an insane amount of focus, dexterity, and let's face it, a good dose of patience. One slip of the hand, and you could end up with a pattern that looks more like a visual interpretation of a jazz solo than a coherent design. Now, let's talk about the labor-intensive techniques that our ancient Andean weavers used to create those jaw-dropping patterns. We're dealing with a level of complexity that would make even the most seasoned coder cower in fear. These artisans weren't just weaving, they were crafting narratives, embedding stories and social signals into every thread. The weavers used techniques like complementary warp and double cloth, which allowed them to create intricate geometric patterns that could be reversible. Yes, reversible. While we're struggling with reversible jackets today, these folks were making two-in-one textiles centuries ago. Talk about efficiency. But not every weaving day was a triumph worthy of a museum display. Let's face it, sometimes the loom had other plans. Weaving disasters were as much a part of the process as the masterpieces themselves. Imagine spending weeks on a textile only to realize that a miscounted warp thread has turned your intricate pattern into an unintentional abstract art piece. It's like spending hours baking a cake, only to discover you forgot the sugar. Oops doesn't quite cover it. The occasional mishap aside, the backstrap loom was a tool of empowerment. It democratized the art of weaving, making it accessible to anyone with the skill and the will to learn. It didn't matter if you were a lowly farmer or a high-ranking noble. If you could weave, you could create something of value. Of course, this also meant that competition was fierce. The pressure to produce textiles that could outshine your neighbors was real, and the stakes were high. After all, a well-crafted textile wasn't just a piece of fabric. It was a ticket to social mobility, a tangible demonstration of skill that could elevate your standing in the community. And while we're at it, let's dispel a romantic notion, the idea that these weavers were solitary artists, working alone in a state of creative bliss. The reality is far less idyllic. Weaving was a social activity, often done in groups with weavers sitting side by side, sharing stories, gossip, and maybe a bit of friendly rivalry. It was a communal task that brought people together, a shared experience that reinforced bonds and built communities. The sound of looms clacking in unison was the heartbeat of the village, a rhythmic reminder of the collective effort that went into crafting the fabrics that defined their world. The economic implications of this craft are staggering. In a society where textiles were as valuable as gold, the ability to weave was akin to having a money-printing machine. Weavers weren't just artisans. They were economic powerhouses, contributing to the wealth and status of their families and communities. And while the modern world might scoff at the idea of fabric being more valuable than precious metals, the Andeans knew what they were doing. Textiles were practical, portable, and most importantly, they were a renewable resource. Gold might glitter, but you can't wear it to keep warm on a chilly Andean night. So, as you sit there, imagining yourself at a backstrap loom, remember that each thread you weave is a testament to the skill, patience, and creativity of the Andean weavers who came before you. They wove more than just fabric. They wove history, culture, and identity into every piece. And as the sun begins to dip behind the mountains, casting long shadows over the vibrant threads, you can't help but feel a sense of awe at the legacy they left behind, a legacy that continues to inspire and intrigue us to this day. And just like that, as the sun dips behind the mountains, you're not just left with a stunning Andean sunset, but an even more resplendent realization. The Andean textile industry wasn't just a cottage industry. It was a veritable empire of threads, a vast network that could make the Silk Road look like a mere footpath. Seriously, the scope of this operation was staggering. We're talking about an entire civilization that organized its economy around weaving, managing to coordinate production on a massive scale without so much as a sticky note, let alone a spreadsheet. Now, let's take a closer look at how this woven wonder was organized. The Andean civilizations, particularly the Incas, were masters at creating an economy that ran like a well-oiled machine, without the oil, of course. Textiles weren't just a product. They were the currency, the status symbol, and the social media platform of their day. Forget about Bitcoin. These guys had cloth coin. And just like any currency, the production and distribution of textiles had to be meticulously planned and executed. At the heart of this operation were the Mida and the Aklawasi. The Mida was a labor system that required communities to contribute a certain amount of work to state projects. It was basically a tax paid in labor, your 9 to 5, except in this case it was more like a dawn to dusk, and your payment was in hours rather than dollars. The Aklawasi, on the other hand, was a sort of textile factory where chosen women, or Aklakuna, worked their magic on the looms, producing the finest textiles for the state. These weren't just any textiles. They were the creme de la creme, the campi, reserved for the elite and used as political tools. But how did they manage such an extensive operation? Think of it as the world's most elaborate supply chain, minus the supply chain management software. You had fibers sourced from alpacas and llamas scattered across the Andean highlands, dyes extracted from plants, minerals, and insects, and a workforce spread across vast distances. Somehow, all these elements came together in a seamless process that would make even the most seasoned logistics manager break out in hives. The Andeans achieved this through a combination of local autonomy and centralized control. Communities were responsible for their own production quotas, which meant everyone had a stake in the outcome. It was a bit like a franchise model, but instead of burgers and fries, you had tunics and tapestries. The state provided the framework and the resources, while local communities handled the nitty-gritty of production. This decentralized approach allowed for flexibility and adaptability, ensuring that the system could withstand everything from natural disasters to the occasional llama strike. And let's not forget the role of record-keeping in all of this. Now, before you start picturing dusty scrolls or stone tablets, remember that the Incas had their own unique way of keeping track of things, the quipu. These were intricate devices consisting of colored threads and knots, which functioned as a sort of binary code for the ancients. While it might not have been as flashy as a spreadsheet, it was certainly effective. Quipus allowed the Andeans to record everything from census data to textile production, ensuring that the flow of goods was as smooth as a freshly woven cloth. But here's the kicker. Despite the scale and complexity of this operation, the Andean textile industry was incredibly efficient. The Incas managed to produce vast quantities of textiles without resorting to mass production techniques. Each piece was crafted with care and precision, a testament to the skill and dedication of the weavers. It was an artisanal industry on a grand scale, a contradiction that would make any modern economist do a double take. Now, let's tackle a popular myth head-on. The notion that the Incas were a bunch of savages who stumbled upon their wealth by accident. The truth is, their textile industry was no accident. It was a carefully planned and executed strategy that required an understanding of economics, logistics, and social dynamics. The Incas were not only skilled weavers, but also shrewd businessmen, capable of managing an empire without the trappings of modern civilization. And let's talk numbers, because what's an economy without some cold, hard stats? An average Incan tunic, known as an unku, required about 6,000 yards of thread. To put that in perspective, that's roughly the length of 60 football fields, and that's just for one tunic. The production of a single campi garment could take over 500 hours, equivalent to watching the entire series of Friends twice, without the laugh track. This wasn't just a hobby, it was a full-time job, and a demanding one at that. So, what was the payoff for all this effort? In a word, status. In the Andean world, textiles were more than just clothing, they were a symbol of power and prestige. A finely woven garment was a badge of honor, a sign of one's place in the social hierarchy. The more elaborate the pattern, the higher the status. It was a visual language that communicated everything from wealth to political allegiance, sartorial declaration of one's place in the world. And here's where the economic impact really hits home. By controlling the production and distribution of textiles, the Incan state was able to maintain its power and influence over a vast territory. Textiles were used to reward loyalty, forge alliances, and even subjugate conquered peoples. They were a tool of diplomacy and a weapon of war, a tangible expression of the empire's might. But let's not romanticize it too much. While the textile industry was a source of wealth and power, it also came with its share of challenges. The pressure to produce was immense, and the stakes were high. Failure to meet production quotas could result in punishment, both for individuals and entire communities. It was a system that demanded perfection, and the cost of falling short was steep. However, despite these challenges, the Andeans managed to create a textile industry that was both sustainable and profitable. They understood the value of renewable resources long before the term became a buzzword, and they built an economy that was resilient and adaptable. It was an economy that valued skill and craftsmanship over brute force, and one that continues to inspire awe and admiration to this day. So as you ponder the legacy of the Andean textile industry, remember that it was more than just a means of making a living. It was a way of life, a cornerstone of an empire that was as rich in culture as it was in color. And as the afternoon light fades, casting long shadows over the vibrant threads, you can't help but feel a sense of connection to those ancient weavers who wove not just fabric, but the very fabric of history itself. Now, as the Andean sun dips below the horizon, casting its warm glow over the mountains, it's a good moment to tie up our narrative threads, pun absolutely intended, and reflect on how these ancient weaving techniques have managed to stand the test of time. You might think that a craft as old as the hills would have faded into obscurity, but you'd be wrong. Like that outdated app you refuse to delete, Andean weaving has proven its relevance over centuries, weaving its way into the fabric of modern life and fashion. First, let's shatter the crystal glass of romantic nostalgia and face a hard truth. The legacy of Andean weaving isn't just rainbows and vibrant textiles. The appeal of these ancient techniques lies in their complexity and craftsmanship, sure, but they're also a testament to human resilience and adaptability. The intricate patterns and vibrant colors weren't just for show. They were the result of a sophisticated understanding of natural resources and a meticulous attention to detail that would put most modern-day designers to shame. And these techniques haven't just survived. They've evolved, morphing into something that speaks to the present while paying homage to the past. Take, for instance, the continued use of natural dyes in Andean textiles, a practice that was cutting-edge millennia ago and is considered pretty hip in today's eco-conscious fashion scene. In a world where fast fashion is the norm and sustainability is the exception, the Andean approach to textile production feels like a masterclass in environmental stewardship. Cochineal bugs still reign supreme, producing that eye-popping red dye that's more vibrant than your Instagram feed. And while the techniques have been modernized, the core values remain unchanged. Respect for the environment, a commitment to quality, and an eye for design that transcends time. It's like the iPhone of textiles, constantly updated, but rooted in the same principles. Now, let's debunk a myth that's as persistent as that stain on your favorite shirt. The idea that the Spanish conquest completely obliterated Andean culture. While the conquistadors did indeed wreak havoc, Andean weaving techniques not only survived, but adapted, integrating new influences while maintaining their essence. It was a bit like cultural judo, using the force of the invaders to their advantage. The result, a unique blend of styles that enriched rather than erased the Andean tradition. This cultural resilience is why, centuries later, you can still find these textiles being woven in villages across the Andes, each piece a living testament to a history that refused to unravel. In today's globalized world, Andean textiles have found their way onto international runways and into high-end boutiques. Designers from Paris to Milan have taken inspiration from the vibrant patterns and bold colors, incorporating them into collections that fetch prices as steep as the mountains they originate from. It's as if the ancient Andean weavers were whispering in the ears of modern designers, reminding them that true style is timeless. And in a fashion industry that often prioritizes the ephemeral over the eternal, this connection to the past is both a grounding force and a source of inspiration. But let's not pretend this is all a fairy tale of cultural harmony. The reality is that many indigenous communities continue to face economic challenges and exploitation. While the global fashion industry profits from Andean designs, the original artisans often receive little recognition or compensation. It's a classic case of cultural appropriation, where the aesthetic is celebrated, but the people behind it are overlooked. So next time you see an Andean-inspired piece on the catwalk, remember the hands that wove it, the history it represents, and the ongoing struggle for fair recognition. As the evening deepens and the stars begin to twinkle over the Andes, it's clear that the legacy of Andean weaving is more than just a tapestry of vibrant colors and intricate patterns. It's a narrative of survival and adaptation, a story woven into every thread and dye. From the ancient backstrap looms to the cutting-edge designs of today, this craft has not only endured but thrived, proving that some things, like a well-woven textile, are truly timeless. And as you drift off to sleep, perhaps with visions of alpacas and vibrant patterns dancing in your head, remember this. The Andean weavers weren't just creating fabric. They were weaving the very essence of their culture, one thread at a time. If you think of Abraham Lincoln and immediately conjure up the image of a stoic man in a top hat, delivering the Gettysburg Address with a voice like booming thunder, you might be in for a surprise. Before he was Honest Abe, the great emancipator, or even president, Lincoln was just a run-of-the-mill kid from Kentucky with a penchant for storytelling and a face that was more awkward teenager than dignified statesman. Let's roll back the clock to February 12, 1809, when Lincoln was born in a one-room log cabin in Hardin County, Kentucky, now part of modern-day LaRue County. Think rustic charm, but not quite the kind you'd find in a hipster urban. His family was dirt poor, and I mean that literally. The floor was made of packed earth, which is just a fancy way of saying mud. His father, Thomas Lincoln, was a farmer and carpenter who struggled to make ends meet, and his mother, Nancy Hanks Lincoln, was a hard-working woman who, like many mothers at the time, probably didn't get nearly enough credit for keeping the family afloat. Abe's early life wasn't exactly a scene out of Little House on the Prairie. For starters, Kentucky was a frontier state, and the Lincolns weren't exactly swimming in wealth. Thomas Lincoln could barely read, and Nancy was only slightly more educated, but the frontier was ripe with opportunity, if you considered back-breaking labor and a constant threat of disease as opportunities. Young Abe, however, was more interested in books than plows, which was a bit of an anomaly in those parts. The Lincolns moved around a bit, setting up shop in Indiana when Abe was 7. Indiana wasn't much different from Kentucky in terms of frontier living, but it was here that Abe got his first taste of formal education. Don't get too excited, though we're talking about a total of 18 months of school spread out over several years. Yep, that's right, 18 months. Talk about being a self-starter. But Abe was nothing if not resourceful. He borrowed books from neighbors and read anything he could get his hands on, from the Bible to the life of George Washington. If you imagine Abe as a lanky kid with his nose buried in a book, you'd be spot on. He was a voracious reader, which was a bit of a rarity in a place where the primary reading material was usually the Sears catalog. Now, it wouldn't be a proper coming-of-age story without some odd jobs to spice things up. Abe worked as a rail splitter, which is exactly as glamorous as it sounds. Picture him in a field, swinging an axe to split logs for fences, a task that was as tedious as it was physically demanding. The pay, not exactly enough to buy a mansion, but it was honest work. He also did stints as a store clerk, which probably explains his later knack for negotiation and debate. There was even a brief, and I mean blink and you'll miss it, period where he tried his hand at being a riverboat pilot on the Mississippi River. Spoiler alert, he didn't stick with it. Despite his lack of formal schooling, Lincoln had a rare gift for storytelling. It said that he could spin a yarn that kept folks entertained for hours. Whether it was a tall tale or a humorous anecdote, Abe had a way with words that would later serve him well in politics. But back then, it just made him the life of the party, or more accurately, the life of the barn raising. His ability to make people laugh and think was a precursor to his future as one of the nation's most eloquent leaders. Yet, life wasn't all jokes and storytelling for young Lincoln. His mother, Nancy, died when he was just 9 years old from milk sickness, a disease caused by drinking the milk of cows that had grazed on white snakeroot. It was a devastating blow, but in a twist of fate, his father remarried a year later to Sarah Bush Johnston, a widow with 3 children of her own. Sarah brought warmth and stability to the Lincoln home, and she encouraged Abe's love of reading. She was one of the few people who recognized his potential, and Abe often credited her with being a guiding force in his life. It's easy to romanticize Abe's log cabin beginnings as the quintessential American dream story, but let's not sugarcoat it. Life was tough, and the frontier was unforgiving. Yet these experiences shaped Lincoln's character, giving him a deep sense of empathy and a commitment to hard work. These were the formative years that set the stage for the man who would eventually rise to the highest office in the land. So, next time you think of Lincoln, remember the boy who started off in a humble cabin, armed with little more than a few books and a knack for storytelling. He's proof that sometimes the most unlikely beginnings can lead to extraordinary things. And who knows, maybe those rail-splitting muscles came in handy when he was wrestling his way through Congress. With those rail-splitting muscles honed and his storytelling chops well developed, Lincoln set his sights on the next frontier, Illinois politics. Now, before you start picturing him as the honest, humble hero who single-handedly cleaned up the political scene, let's add a little nuance. Sure, Lincoln had a knack for winning hearts with his earnest demeanor and folksy charm, but he was no stranger to the rough-and-tumble world of 19th century politics. Fast forward to 1831, when Abe landed in New Salem, Illinois, a bustling little village with more ambition than people. He tried his hand at just about everything: postmaster, surveyor, and even running a general store. Spoiler alert, the store went belly up, leaving Abe in debt. But it was during these years that he began to whet his appetite for law and politics, and in 1834 he made his first successful bid for the Illinois state legislature as a member of the Whig Party. Now, let's clear up the honest Abe myth. Yes, Lincoln was known for his integrity, but that doesn't mean he wasn't strategic, or dare I say it, a bit cunning. For instance, during his early political campaigns, Lincoln would often engage in handbill wars, where candidates would publish pamphlets promoting themselves and trashing opponents. Lincoln was a master at this, using his gift for language to sway voters. Honest, maybe not entirely. Effective, absolutely. In the legislature, Lincoln began to build his legal career, riding the circuit, a grueling endeavor that involved traveling hundreds of miles on horseback from one county courthouse to another. Think of it as the original road trip, but instead of snacks and sing-alongs, you had dusty trails and legal tomes. It was during this time that Lincoln honed his skills in debate and gained a reputation as a formidable lawyer. By the way, his legal fees were nothing to scoff at. In 1841, he charged $5 for a day's work, which might sound like chump change today, but was decent pay back then. Speaking of debates, let's not forget Lincoln's legendary showdowns with Stephen Douglas during the 1858 Illinois Senate race. These were the Super Bowl of political debates, folks. Lincoln, the underdog, armed with his homespun humor and razor-sharp wit, squared off against Douglas, the well-seasoned incumbent. Picture Lincoln, towering over Douglas, delivering zingers with the precision of a master fencer. One of the most famous exchanges involved Lincoln's deft handling of the slavery issue, where he argued against its expansion into new territories. Douglas, on the other hand, was pushing his popular sovereignty idea, which was essentially a fancy way of saying, let the territories decide for themselves. But the real kicker, despite Lincoln's stellar performance in these debates, he didn't win the Senate seat. Nope, Douglas took the prize, which might seem like a huge letdown. Yet here's the twist. The debates catapulted Lincoln onto the national stage, setting the stage for his eventual presidential run. It's like losing the battle, but winning the war. Classic Lincoln. And let's not gloss over the role of Lincoln's friendships and alliances in his rise. Take Joshua Speed, a wealthy storekeeper who became one of Lincoln's closest confidants. The two men shared more than just political ideals. They shared a bed in the cramped quarters above Speed's store. Before you raise an eyebrow, this was common practice back then. Their friendship provided Lincoln with crucial political connections and emotional support during some of his darkest times. Lincoln's legal savvy and political acumen weren't just innate. They were honed in the crucible of Illinois politics. He knew how to play the game, leveraging strategic friendships and his growing reputation as a lawyer to climb the political ladder. So, while Honest Abe sounds nice, the reality is that Lincoln was every bit the shrewd operator his rivals were. He just happened to do it with a bit more charm and a lot more integrity. In this whirlwind of political maneuvering, legal challenges, and rhetorical showdowns, Lincoln was crafting his identity, not just as a politician, but as a leader. And as much as we like to think of him as the solitary giant who stood above the fray, the truth is far more interesting. Lincoln was a man who understood the power of words and the importance of alliances, who combined his natural talents with hard-earned skills to navigate the treacherous waters of 19th century politics. So, as we leave Lincoln in the throes of Illinois politics, remember, the man who would become the great emancipator was also a master of the art of political survival. His rise was as much about calculated moves and strategic friendships as it was about his moral compass. In the next chapter of this saga, we'll see how these early lessons served him as he moved towards the national stage. Stay tuned. As we segue from the nitty-gritty of Lincoln's political ascent in Illinois, let's saddle up and gallop straight into the chaos of his presidency during the Civil War. Now, if you've got an image of Lincoln as this lone, stoic figure tackling the Confederacy single-handedly, it's time for a reality check. Yes, he was the face of the Union, but behind the scenes, it was more of a political circus, complete with jugglers, tightrope walkers, and the occasional clown. Enter the team of rivals, Lincoln's cabinet, a more gloriously dysfunctional bunch you'd be hard-pressed to find. Let's set the stage. It's March 4, 1861. Lincoln, fresh from his inauguration, had the daunting task of holding together a nation unraveling faster than a cheap sweater in a spin cycle. 7 southern states had already seceded, and more were itching to join the club. This wasn't just a political headache, it was a full-blown migraine. And yet, Lincoln, with his characteristic humor, commented that he was like a man trying to swap horses midstream. Sure, a tad optimistic considering the waters were raging torrents, but optimism was Lincoln's secret sauce. Now, about that cabinet. The team of rivals sounds like something out of a superhero flick, right? Spoiler alert. It was less Avengers and more dysfunctional family reunion. Lincoln's theory was simple. Gather the best minds, even if they couldn't stand each other. His cabinet included his former political opponents like Salmon P. Chase, a man so ambitious he practically had presidential aspirations tattooed on his forehead. Then there was William H. Seward, who initially thought he'd run the show while Lincoln played the figurehead. Spoiler alert, he was wrong. Managing this crew was akin to herding cats, intelligent, opinionated cats who all thought they should be the one wearing the top hat. The genius. Lincoln knew how to juggle their egos and utilize their strengths, much like a master chef using disparate ingredients to create a gourmet dish. But it wasn't all culinary harmony. The cabinet meetings were often more heated than a July afternoon in Washington, with debates that could rival any modern-day reality show for drama. As the Civil War raged on, Lincoln was faced with the monumental task of keeping the Union intact while tackling the thorny issue of slavery. Enter the Emancipation Proclamation, a document as bold as it was controversial. Signed on January 1, 1863, it declared that all slaves in Confederate-held territory were to be set free. Now, before you start throwing around terms like heroic liberator, let's get real about the context. Lincoln was no abolitionist from the get-go. His primary mission, preserve the Union. The Emancipation Proclamation wasn't just a moral statement. It was a strategic move to weaken the Confederacy. By declaring freedom for slaves in rebel-held areas, Lincoln aimed to disrupt Southern economies and encourage enslaved people to flee to Union lines, a tactic as much about military advantage as moral high ground. Plus, it was a diplomatic masterstroke. By framing the war as a fight against slavery, Lincoln effectively kept European powers like Britain and France from siding with the Confederacy. After all, who wants to be the nation supporting slavery in the 19th century? Talk about a PR nightmare. Lincoln understood the global chessboard, and he played it with the finesse of a grandmaster. But let's not romanticize the proclamation as a magic wand that that ended slavery overnight, freed slaves only in areas controlled by the Confederates, not in the border states loyal to the Union. It was a crucial step, yes, but far from the finish line. The 13th Amendment, which truly abolished slavery throughout the United States, wouldn't come until 1865, a stark reminder that progress often comes in fits and starts rather than sweeping, cinematic moments. The political pressures Lincoln faced during this time were immense. He was navigating a landscape where every decision was scrutinized, second-guessed, and criticized. The Democratic press dubbed him a tyrant. The radicals thought he was too conservative. It was a classic no-win situation, yet Lincoln's unique blend of pragmatism and moral clarity kept him afloat. In the midst of this turmoil, Lincoln's humor was his secret weapon. Legend has it that, during a particularly tense cabinet meeting, Lincoln launched into a story about Ethan Allen and a portrait of George Washington in a British outhouse. The punchline: Americans were amused, while the British were left fuming. It was a classic Lincoln move, using humor to diffuse tension and remind his cabinet that even in dire times, a little levity could go a long way. And let's not forget the human side of Lincoln, the man who suffered personal tragedies with a stoic grace that belied his grief. During the war, he lost his beloved son Willie to typhoid fever, a blow that left him and Mary Todd Lincoln devastated. Yet he soldiered on, driven by a sense of duty that transcended personal heartbreak. So, as we leave Lincoln navigating the treacherous waters of Civil War politics, remember that the man in the top hat was no solitary giant. He was a master of coalition building, a strategic thinker who understood the power of both compromise and conviction. The myth of Lincoln as a lone hero is as incomplete as it is compelling. He was a leader who knew that the path to lasting change was neither straight nor solitary, and his legacy is all the richer for it. As we gear up to explore the next chapter of Lincoln's presidency, hold onto your hats, preferably top hats, because the ride's about to get even more tumultuous. There's more to uncover about how this rail-splitter turned storyteller kept America stitched together with wit, wisdom, and a dash of audacity. Stay tuned. So, as we pivot from the political whirlwind of Lincoln's presidency, let's tiptoe into the more intimate corners of his life, where the top hats come off and the family dynamics take center stage. Enter Mary Todd Lincoln, the First Lady who's often portrayed as a tempestuous figure, leaving historians scratching their heads while tabloids of the time had a field day. Now, Mary Todd wasn't exactly what you call an ordinary woman of the 19th century. Raised in a wealthy, slave-holding family in Lexington, Kentucky, she was well-educated and well-connected, an early adopter of the networking concept, if you will. They met in Springfield, Illinois, and by all accounts, sparks flew. Or maybe it was more like a meteor shower. Their courtship was a mix of intellectual debates and passionate arguments, the kind that would make reality TV producers salivate. They married on November 4, 1842. Picture a wedding scene that's less about white doves and more about the clash of personalities. Mary was ambitious and social, while Abe was, well, more of a stay-at-home-and-read type. Yet, despite their differences, they somehow worked. It was a classic case of opposites attract, like peanut butter and jelly, if peanut butter was a brooding introvert with a penchant for melancholy. Speaking of melancholy, Lincoln's struggles with depression were no secret. In today's terms, he'd probably have a therapist on speed dial. Back then, he coped with his melancholia, as it was called, by pouring himself into his work and leaning on Mary for support. If you're picturing him as a man who used humor to mask his pain, you're hitting the nail on the head. But let's not sugarcoat it. Lincoln's mental health was a constant struggle, one that added a layer of complexity to his public persona. Their life in the White House was anything but serene. Imagine living in a fishbowl where every move was scrutinized and every decision dissected. Mary, often criticized for her spending habits, was labeled extravagant. In reality, she was trying to bring some semblance of grace to the presidential mansion, which was more of a fixer-upper when the Lincolns moved in. The White House needed serious TLC, and Mary took the reins, overseeing renovations that included everything from new china to lavish curtains. Sure, she exceeded the congressional appropriation, $20,000 to be precise. But in her defense, she was battling both a lack of funds and a heap of expectations. Public perception of Mary was a roller coaster of opinions. Some saw her as a Southern sympathizer, thanks to her Kentucky roots and her family's Confederate connections. Others painted her as a grieving mother, haunted by the death of their son Willie in 1862, a loss that left her shattered. The truth, she was both. A complex figure who navigated personal and political storms with a resilience that's often overlooked. Amidst the political chaos and personal tragedies, the Lincolns found solace in their family life. They had 4 sons: Robert, Edward, Willie, and Tad. Only Robert survived to adulthood, a grim reminder of the harsh realities of 19th century life. Yet their household was anything but summer. It was filled with the laughter and chaos typical of any family with young children. Lincoln loved his kids fiercely. Tad, in particular, was a whirlwind of energy, often roaming the White House with the freedom of a kid in a candy store. And let's not forget Lincoln's love for animals. The White House was a veritable petting zoo, thanks to Tad's penchant for adopting creatures of all kinds. From a turkey named Jack to goats that roamed the halls, Lincoln indulged his son's whims with a patience that belied his stoic public image. One story goes that Tad's turkey was slated for the dinner table until Lincoln, in a presidential act of clemency, spared it, setting the stage for the modern-day tradition of the presidential turkey pardon. Beyond the hustle of political life and the bustle of family, Lincoln found comfort in storytelling, a habit that often left his aides exchanging bemused glances. His stories were legendary, peppered with wit and wisdom, and served as a way to communicate complex ideas in a digestible format. It was during these moments that the man behind the myth shone through, a leader who understood the power of narratives in shaping public opinion. At home, Lincoln was a man who wore many hats, literally and figuratively. He was a husband, father, and leader, juggling roles with a dexterity that was nothing short of remarkable. The romantic image of a unified, happy first family is as appealing as it is inaccurate. The truth, they were a family like any other, navigating the ups and downs of life with a mix of love, laughter, and a fair amount of tension. So, as we delve deeper into the life of Abraham Lincoln, it becomes clear that the man who held a fractured nation together was also working tirelessly to keep his family intact. His story is one of resilience and complexity, a testament to the human capacity for growth amidst adversity. And as we continue this journey, remember, the legend of Lincoln is as much about the man behind the closed doors as it is about the figure standing tall on the national stage. Stay tuned for more revelations in this saga of grit and grace. And so we find ourselves at the doorstep of April 14, 1865, a date etched in American history with the kind of tragic significance that makes even the most stoic among us pause. Lincoln, having steered the country through a storm that would make the Odyssey look like a leisurely cruise, was finally glimpsing the possibility of peace. The Civil War was drawing to a close. The Union victory was all but assured, and Lincoln had just signed legislation to create the Secret Service. Ironically, its purpose was to combat counterfeiting, not to protect the president's life. Oh, the cruel twists of fate. That fateful evening, Lincoln and Mary Todd decided to catch a performance of Our American Cousin at Ford's Theater. It was a much-needed respite from the pressures of leadership, a chance to unwind and perhaps, for a moment, forget the weight of the world. But history, with its love for tragic irony, had other plans. Enter John Wilkes Booth, a famous actor and Confederate sympathizer with a flair for drama and a penchant for misguided patriotism. Booth, with his half-baked ambitions and a pistol that would change the course of history, slipped into the president's box. At approximately 10:15 p.m., he fired a single shot into Lincoln's head. The theater erupted into chaos. Booth leaped onto the stage, breaking his leg in a stumble that would have been comedic under any other circumstance, and fled into the night, leaving behind a nation stunned into silence. Lincoln was carried across the street to a boarding house, where he lay unconscious for hours. The next morning, April 15, at 7:22 a.m., Abraham Lincoln, the 16th President of the United States, was pronounced dead. He was 56 years old. Secretary of War Edwin Stanton, perhaps summing up the collective grief of the nation, reportedly said, "Now he belongs to the ages." Or was it angels? History can't quite agree, but either way, the sentiment remains poignant. In the immediate aftermath of Lincoln's assassination, the nation plunged into mourning. His body was placed on a funeral train that traveled from Washington, D.C., to Springfield, Illinois, retracing the path he had taken to the White House. This 654-mile journey became a rolling requiem, with thousands lining the tracks to pay their respects. It was as if the country was trying to collectively hold onto the man who had held the Union together with little more than wit and willpower. But as the initial shock subsided, America began the process of mythologizing Lincoln, turning him into a symbol as much as a man. The great emancipator narrative took center stage, casting Lincoln as the singular hero who freed the slaves and saved the Union. It's a compelling story, no doubt, but let's not let the romance overshadow the reality. Lincoln's primary goal was preserving the Union. Emancipation was a strategic decision, an act of war as much as a moral crusade. And while the Emancipation Proclamation was undeniably a crucial step, it didn't immediately free all enslaved people. That would take the 13th Amendment, ratified in December 1865, 8 months after Lincoln's death. Over time, Lincoln's image was polished to a high gloss, each successive generation projecting its values and aspirations onto him. By the early 20th century, he was canonized as a paragon of virtue, a larger-than-life figure who embodied the quintessential American ideals of freedom and equality. Yet, this sanitized version of Lincoln often glosses over the complexities of his character and the contentious nature of his presidency. He suspended habeas corpus, navigated the murky waters of political patronage, and wrestled with profound personal demons. The real Lincoln was a man of contradictions, a pragmatist who sometimes had to play the game of politics with the best of them. As societal needs evolved, so too did Lincoln's legacy. During the Great Depression, he was held up as a symbol of perseverance in the face of adversity. In the Civil Rights era, his words inspired a new generation of activists fighting for equality. And today, he remains a cultural touchstone, his image gracing everything from the penny to the $5 bill, a testament to his enduring impact, but also a reminder of how history often distills complex figures into convenient icons. So, what do we make of Lincoln, both man and myth? Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in the middle. Yes, he was a visionary leader who navigated one of the most tumultuous periods in American history. But he was also a man who struggled, who faltered, and who, like all of us, was shaped by the time and circumstances he lived in. His greatness wasn't in his perfection, but in his ability to rise above his limitations and inspire a fractured nation to do the same. In examining Lincoln's legacy, we're reminded of the absurdities inherent in how we remember historical figures. The tendency to simplify, to smooth out the rough edges, is as tempting as it is misleading. But in recognizing the full spectrum of Lincoln's humanity, we gain a deeper appreciation for his achievements and a more nuanced understanding of the past. As we wrap up this journey through Lincoln's life and legacy, let's remember him not just as the towering figure in the stovepipe hat, but as a man who, despite his flaws, left an indelible mark on the nation. His story is one of resilience, complexity, and yes, a fair bit of absurdity, a reminder that even the most mythologized figures in history are, at their core, profoundly human. And there you have it, Lincoln, warts and all. The legend and the reality, intertwined in a story as rich and textured as the land he helped to unite. So next time you find yourself pondering the man on the penny, remember that his life, like history itself, is a tapestry of contradictions and complexities woven together by the threads of both triumph and tragedy. Because in the end, isn't that what makes history and humanity so endlessly fascinating? If you ever wanted to know what it was like to wander across ancient Europe as a member of a Celtic tribe, you'd better buckle up for a wild ride. These folks were the original European influencers. Before there was Instagram, there were Celtic warriors, flaunting their blue-painted bodies and intricate spiral tattoos like they were walking runway models at a prehistoric fashion week. But don't be fooled by the glamour. These were people with a penchant for battle and a knack for making the Romans sweat bullets. Seriously, it's like the Celts were the rock stars of their time, while the Romans were the uptight concert promoters trying desperately to keep them in line. Now, when we talk about Celtic tribes, we're not just talking about the folks in Scotland who still sport kilts and bagpipes. No, the Celts were a whole buffet of tribes spread across Europe from the British Isles to the Iberian Peninsula. Picture a map of Europe. Okay, fine, don't picture it. But imagine a mental map where the Celts occupied not just modern-day Ireland and Scotland, but also parts of France, Spain, and even bits of Turkey. That's right, the Celts were like the original backpackers, minus the Instagram stories and questionable hostile choices. But what exactly made a Celt a Celt? Was it the love for spirals and blue paint? Maybe. Was it their warrior prowess? Absolutely. Or was it their shared linguistic roots? Bingo! The Celts were united by their languages, which formed the Celtic branch of the Indo-European language family. And here's a fun fact to drop at your next trivia night. The Celtic languages are still spoken today. Ever heard Welsh? That's a modern Celtic language, and it's about as easy to pronounce as a mouthful of peanut butter. Now, let's address the elephant, or rather, the fearsome warrior, in the room. Why exactly were the Romans so terrified of the Celts? It all comes down to the Celts' unique brand of combat. Imagine facing an army where the soldiers are not only charging at you with ferocity, but also doing so while painted in intimidating blue designs. The Romans, who were used to more, shall we say, orthodox military tactics, found this utterly terrifying. And let's be real, who wouldn't be freaked out by a bunch of blue-painted warriors charging at you with axes and swords? But beyond their fearsome reputation, the Celts were more than just warriors. They were also skilled artisans and traders. They didn't just sit around sharpening swords all day. They created intricate jewelry, weaponry, and art that would make even the most avant-garde modern designer swoon. Their use of spirals and complex knotwork motifs wasn't just an artistic choice. It was a cultural signature that left a lasting legacy. The Celts were the OGs of branding, if you will, with their art and symbols still being recognized today. Now, let's talk about the societal glue that held these tribes together. Celtic society was a tapestry woven with complex familial, tribal, and intertribal relationships. At the top of the food chain were the warrior elites, the aristocrats of the battlefield, if you will. They were the ones who led the tribes into battle and ensured that everyone knew their place in the social hierarchy. Below them were the Druids, the religious and legal experts who wielded a different kind of power. Think of them as the ancient world's Google, the Goda for all things spiritual and legal. Then there were the craftspeople and traders who kept the economy ticking. And of course, the farmers who made sure everyone had something to eat after a long day of raiding or crafting. Despite their fearsome reputation, the Celts weren't all about warfare and conquest. They established trade networks that stretched across Europe, exchanging goods like salt, wine, and precious metals long before the modern concept of a European Union was even a twinkle in anyone's eye. They were pioneers of economic globalization, sans the bureaucracy and paperwork. One might ask, how did a culture so widespread and diverse maintain any semblance of cohesion? The answer lies in their shared cultural practices, and of course, their penchant for storytelling. The Celts loved a good yarn, and oral traditions were the backbone of their cultural identity. Like any good story, these tales were filled with heroes, battles, and the occasional magical creature. Move over, Middle-earth. The Celts were doing it first. But let's not get too swept away by the romance of it all. Life for the average Celt wasn't all feasting and storytelling. It was tough, gritty, and often violent. While the aristocrats might have had the luxury of ornate jewelry and finely crafted weapons, the average Celt was more concerned with the practicalities of survival. Farming wasn't just a hobby, it was a necessity. And while the Celtic warriors were off earning their fearsome reputation, someone had to stay behind and make sure the crops didn't fail. So, what's the takeaway from all this Celtic chaos? Well, it's a reminder that history is messy, complex, and downright fascinating. The Celts, with their blue paint, spirals, and fearsome battle tactics, played a crucial role in shaping the Europe we know today. They were a tapestry of warriors, artisans, and storytellers whose influence stretched far beyond their time. And while the Romans might have eventually gotten the upper hand, the Celts left a legacy that still resonates in the languages, art, and cultural practices of Europe. As we continue our journey through the world of the Celts, remember, these weren't just warriors with a knack for paint and spirals. They were a vibrant, complex society that defied easy categorization and left an indelible mark on history. And if nothing else, they sure knew how to make an impression. After all, it's not every day you get to terrify the most powerful empire the world had ever seen with a bit of blue paint and some killer spiral designs. So, If you thought the Celts were all about battle cries and blue war paint, wait till you meet their social hierarchy. Get ready to unravel a world that's as intricate as their artwork designs, and as layered as a Celtic warrior's battle gear. At the summit of this social mountain were the chieftains, and they weren't your average head honchos. These guys were the power players, the ones holding the reins of tribal leadership with the flair of a rock star holding a mic. Think of them as the original CEOs, except their board meetings probably involved more ale and less PowerPoint. But governance in Celtic tribes was less about formal structures and more about personal charisma and martial prowess. Chieftains had to earn their stripes in battle and at the feast, proving their mettle both on the field and at the table. If you ever wondered why being a good host was key, well, for the Celts, it could make or break your career. A successful chieftain was one who could rally warriors with inspiring speeches, provide lavish feasts, and crucially, lead victorious raids. The payoff: glory, loyalty, and the occasional piece of Roman loot. Now, beneath these chieftains were the bards. Think of them as the Instagram influencers of their age, but with more poetry and less photo editing. Bards were the keepers of history, the narrators of epic tales and genealogies, and their words could elevate a chieftain's status or plunge it into the depths of obscurity. They were the ones spinning tales that could make or break reputations, and in a society without written records, that was no small feat. If a bard sang your praises, you were golden. If not, well, you might as well pack up your swords and call it a day. But let's not forget the Druids. Ah, the Druids, those enigmatic figures who have been romanticized more than a Celtic love story. Part priest, part judge, and part mystery, Druids were the spiritual backbone of Celtic society. They were the ones who interpreted omens, presided over sacrifices, and settled disputes. Basically, if you had a problem, you went to a Druid, who needs a therapist, and you can have someone who claims to chat with the gods. And yet, despite the allure of stone circles and misty rituals, Druids were far more than just mystical figures. They were also educators and lawgivers, with the power to influence major societal decisions. It's easy to picture Druids as moonlit figures dancing around Stonehenge, but let's bust that myth wide open. While they were indeed connected to nature and spirituality, there wasn't much twirling around ancient monuments. Druids had a sophisticated understanding of nature and astronomy, and they played a crucial role in agricultural societies. They could tell you when to plant your crops, not with a farmer's almanac, but by observing the heavens. And if you think they were all about sacrificing humans, think again. While some accounts, notably from the Romans, suggest human sacrifices, much of this was likely exaggerated to paint the Celts as barbaric. The truth: Druids were as likely to be dispensing wisdom as they were to be conducting rituals. Now, let's dive into the power dynamics. The Celts had a knack for forming shifting alliances, making their political landscape as volatile as a Game of Thrones episode. Chieftains had to constantly negotiate, not just with neighboring tribes, but within their own ranks. You see, power in Celtic society wasn't just handed down like a family heirloom. Oh no, it was earned through feats of bravery, convincing oratory, and sometimes a good old-fashioned raid. Imagine a world where your status depended not just on your birthright, but on your ability to lead warriors to victory and ensure the prosperity of your tribe. But while chieftains and druids wielded power, it was the warriors who backed them up. These were the muscle, the enforcers of tribal decisions, and the embodiment of Celtic valor. They fought not just for glory, but for the economic benefits that came with successful raiding. Spoils of war were distributed among the tribe, with warriors getting their fair share of cattle, metalwork, and sometimes captives who could be ransomed or integrated into the tribe. It was an economy of conquest, with each victory boosting the chieftain's standing and the tribe's wealth. For the average Celt, life was a constant balance of duty and opportunity. Loyalty to your chieftain could bring rewards, but it also required commitment to the tribe's collective goals. And while the bards sang about heroic deeds, the real work often involved long campaigns and hard labor. Yet, these efforts were the glue that held Celtic society together, forging bonds through shared triumphs and trials. In summary, the Celts were much more than just warriors. They were a complex society with its own unique blend of leadership, spirituality, and social dynamics. So, next time you hear about the Celts, remember, it wasn't all blue paint and battle cries. It was also about the chieftains who led, the bards who inspired, and the Druids who guided, a tapestry of roles that made Celtic society as vibrant and dynamic as the spirals they carved into stone. As we continue our journey through their world, let's keep unraveling the threads of history, one fascinating story at a time. So, let's shift gears from the chieftains and Druids and dive into the gritty, fascinating world of Celtic economics. Spoiler alert, it wasn't all shamrocks and rainbows. Sure, the Celts might be famous for their blue war paint and epic tales, but let's not forget they were also sharp traders and master craftsmen. Imagine a Celtic version of Etsy, where instead of digital storefronts, you have bustling marketplaces filled with the metallic clink of coins and the loud bartering of goods. First off, let's talk trade. The Celts were not just isolated warriors lurking in the misty hills. They were active participants in the grand European exchange of goods. We're talking iron, salt, and precious metals being carted around as if they were at the world's earliest farmers' market. Celtic traders roamed from the British Isles to the far reaches of Eastern Europe. Think of them as the original road warriors, minus the leather jackets and screaming guitars. And here's a fun fact that might surprise you. The Celts were wine aficionados. They imported wine from the Mediterranean like it was the latest artisanal brew, swapping their local wares for the sweet nectar of the gods. It was the ancient equivalent of trading your homegrown veggies for a bottle of Napa Valley's finest. The Romans, ever the commentators, noted with surprise the Celtic taste for their wine, which was quaffed down in quantities that would make a modern sommelier blush. But wine wasn't the only thing flowing through the Celtic trade networks. Metalwork was another big-ticket item. The Celts were practically the blacksmiths of Europe, producing weapons and jewelry that were the envy of their neighbors. Celtic craftsmanship, particularly in iron and bronze, was so advanced that even the Romans, those smug conquerors, had to admit they were impressed. The Celts knew how to turn a hunk of metal into a work of art, whether it was a finely balanced sword or a brooch intricately twisted into knots that could make your head spin. Speaking of swords, let's not gloss over the fact that much of this trade fueled the Celtic war machine. Yes, those magnificent swords and axes didn't craft themselves, and they certainly didn't come cheap. Funding a tribal war was not unlike crowdfunding a startup today, except instead of a sleek app, you got a heavily armed tribe ready to raid the next village over. The spoils of war were an integral part of the Celtic economy, and the more successful the raid, the better the payday. It was a high-risk, high-reward game, a bit like playing the stock market with a little more blood involved. Now, let's debunk a myth while we're at it. Ever heard the notion that the Celts were just simple farmers, herding sheep and spinning yarns under a rosy sunset? Romantic, sure, but not the whole picture. Yes, agriculture was crucial. Cattle were practically the currency of the day. But these herders were also shrewd business people. They understood the value of diversification long before any MBA program came along. While some tilled the soil, others were busy hammering out metalwork or negotiating trade deals. And let's not forget about the gig economy. Long before apps and smartphones, the Celts were the original side hustlers. A farmer might moonlight as a blacksmith, or a warrior might dabble in a bit of trading on the side. The ability to juggle multiple roles was not just a survival tactic, but a way to thrive. They were adaptable, resourceful, and always ready to seize an opportunity, whether that meant crafting a plowshare or swinging a sword. Economically speaking, the Celts were no slouches. They understood the importance of resources and had a knack for making the most of what was available. Salt, for instance, was a hot commodity, essential for preserving food and trading. The Celts mined it from places like Hallstatt in modern-day Austria, where evidence of extensive salt mining dates back as far as 800 BCE. This wasn't just your average pantry salt. It was a key player in the trade game, and the Celts knew it. To keep all this trade ticking, the Celts developed an intricate network of trade routes, connecting tribes across vast distances. These weren't your average dirt paths. We're talking about well-trodden roads that stretched for hundreds of miles, linking the far-flung corners of Celtic Europe. And while the Romans might have brought pavement to the party later on, the Celts had already laid the groundwork for their economic highways. So, next time you're sipping a glass of wine or admiring a piece of Celtic-inspired jewelry, spare a thought for the ancient entrepreneurs who made it all possible. They were the original hustlers, the artisans and traders who wove a web of commerce across Europe. Their legacy, an enduring influence on trade and craftsmanship that echoes down to us today, long after their blue paint has faded and their battle cries have echoed into history. But hold on to your talks, because there's more to this story. The Celts, with their knack for trade and craftsmanship, weren't just shaping their present, they were laying the groundwork for future generations. As we continue our journey through their remarkable world, we'll uncover even more about the economic realities that defined their lives and the legacy they left behind. Keep your swords sharp and your minds sharper, because the adventure is far from over. As if the Celts hadn't already left a substantial mark with their trades and tales, their interactions with the Romans added a whole new chapter to the saga. Think of it as the ultimate crossover episode in ancient history. The Romans, those notorious empire builders, were like the uninvited guests at a Celtic feast. They showed up with their legions, their aqueducts, and their insatiable appetite for conquest. And while the Celts were no strangers to battle, they soon discovered that the Romans were a different breed of adversary altogether. Let's rewind to one of the most infamous run-ins between the Celts and the Romans, the sacking of Rome in 390 BC. It's a tale dripping with irony and a touch of schadenfreude for anyone who's ever had a grudge against the Roman Empire. Picture this, a band of Celtic warriors, led by a chieftain named Brennus, marching into the heart of Rome with as much swagger as a rock band on a world tour. The Romans, caught off guard, were completely unprepared for this audacious assault. Brennus and his warriors not only breached the city's defenses, but also seized the opportunity to raid and plunder, turning Rome's streets into their own personal shopping spree. Now, you might be wondering how the Romans let this happen. Well, it turns out that even the mightiest empire has its off days. The Roman army was away dealing with another threat, and what was left of their forces was more like a skeleton crew than the well-oiled machine they were famed for. The Celts, seizing their moment, made history by doing what many had only dreamed of, taking the fight to Rome itself. Brennus, ever the showman, is said to have uttered the infamous phrase, "Vi victis," or "woe to the vanquished," when negotiating the ransom for the city's salvation. Talk about adding insult to injury. Fast forward a few centuries, and the tables had turned. The Romans, not ones to let bygones be bygones, set their sights on Celtic lands with the steely determination of a chess player plotting a checkmate. The conquest of Gaul, led by none other than Julius Caesar, is perhaps the most famous example of Rome's relentless expansion. Between 58 and 50 BC, Caesar embarked on a campaign that was as much about personal glory as it was about expanding the empire. With a mix of strategic genius and ruthless efficiency, Caesar systematically dismantled the Celtic tribes of Gaul, one battle at a time. The Battle of Alesia in 52 BC was the dramatic climax of this campaign, pitting Caesar against the charismatic Celtic leader Vercingetorix. Alesia was a masterclass in Roman engineering and military might. Caesar's forces, outnumbered and besieged, built a series of fortifications around the town, trapping Vercingetorix and his men inside. It was a case of siege warfare at its finest, or worst, depending on which side of the walls you were on. After weeks of starvation and dwindling morale, Vercingetorix was forced to surrender, effectively ending organized Celtic resistance in Gaul. But what about the Celts themselves? Were they just helpless victims of Roman aggression, or did they have their own agency in this epic struggle? Here's where we bust another myth. The Celts weren't just hapless barbarians facing off against a superior civilization. Far from it. They were skilled warriors and cunning tacticians who often outmatched Roman forces in individual skirmishes. However, where they faltered was in uniting their disparate tribes under a single, cohesive strategy. The Romans, on the other hand, were the masters of organization, wielding discipline and coordination like a well-honed sword. The Roman conquest wasn't just a military endeavor, it was a cultural and economic overhaul. The Celts, with their decentralized tribal structures, suddenly found themselves under the rule of a centralized imperial power. Roman roads, cities, and laws began to reshape the Celtic landscape, introducing a new way of life that was as alien as it was transformative. Romanization brought with it the promise of stability and prosperity, but at the cost of Celtic autonomy and tradition. It was a classic case of cultural assimilation, with the Romans playing the role of the all-consuming juggernaut. Yet, despite the overwhelming force of Romanization, Celtic culture didn't just vanish into the mists of history. Elements of it persisted, weaving themselves into the fabric of Roman society. Celtic craftsmanship, for instance, continued to influence Roman art and metalwork. The Celts' reputation as fearsome warriors even earned them places in the Roman military, where they served as auxiliary troops. It's a poignant reminder that even in conquest, cultures can blend and evolve, leaving behind a legacy that's richer and more complex than any single narrative. So, what's the takeaway from this epic clash between Celts and Romans? It's a tale of resistance and resilience, of cultures colliding and reshaping each other in profound ways. The Celts may have lost their independence, but their spirit, embodied in their art, their legends, and their descendants, endured. And as for the Romans, they gained not only new territories, but also a deeper appreciation for the diverse peoples they encountered. As we ponder the legacy of this ancient conflict, it's worth reflecting on the broader themes it presents. Power and empire, identity and assimilation. These are timeless narratives that echo through the corridors of history. The story of the Celts and Romans offers us a window into the complexities of human interaction, reminding us that history is never black and white, but rather a tapestry of vibrant hues, each thread contributing to the whole. In our next exploration, we'll continue to unravel the intricate web of Celtic history, delving deeper into the cultural and economic shifts that followed Roman conquest. But for now, let's pause to consider the enduring impact of these ancient interactions. After all, history isn't just a series of events. It's a living, breathing story, and we're all part of its ongoing narrative. So, stay tuned, keep your curiosity piqued, and let's continue this fascinating journey together. As we take a step back from the swirling dance of Celtic and Roman interactions, it's time to fast forward a few centuries and survey the sprawling legacy the Celts have left in modern culture. A legacy as enduring as the spirals they etched into stone and metal. From festivals to the fantasy novels that fill our bookshelves, the Celts are everywhere. Take Halloween, for instance. This spooky fest isn't just about candy and costumes. It has deep roots in the ancient Celtic festival of Samhain, a celebration marking the end of the harvest season and the onset of winter. Picture bonfires, costumes to ward off ghosts, and a whole lot of communal storytelling. Sounds familiar, right? Samhain was the OG Halloween, long before plastic pumpkins and polyester witches were a thing. Fast forward to today, and Celtic mythology still weaves its magic through our cultural fabric. Think about those epic fantasy series that have us glued to screens and pages, the Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones of the world. J.R.R. Tolkien, that grandmaster of fantasy, drew heavily from Celtic myths to create his legendary Middle-earth. The intricate knotwork and mythical creatures of the Celts found a new home in his pages, influencing generations of storytellers. And George R.R. Martin, his nods to Celtic lore are less overt, but no less significant, a testament to the enduring allure of Celtic mythology. But it's not all fantasy and folklore. Celtic culture also makes a splash in the arts, particularly in music and dance. The haunting strains of a Celtic harp or the toe-tapping rhythms of an Irish jig can transport you straight to a mist-laden glen, even if you're just sitting in rush hour traffic. Celtic music festivals, like those in Lorient, Brittany, or the Flead Cheoil in Ireland, draw crowds by the thousands, celebrating a musical tradition that refuses to be silenced. And let's not forget the bagpipes, that sonic icon of the Highlands, often misunderstood but undeniably captivating. Now, let's address the myths that persist like stubborn stains on history's tapestry. There's the romantic notion of the Celts as noble savages, living free and wild in harmony with nature. A beautiful image, sure, but a tad too simplistic. The Celts were complex, both fierce in battle and sophisticated in art and society. They weren't just nature-loving Druids dancing around stone circles. They were also shrewd traders and skilled warriors who left a mark that even the Romans couldn't fully erase. And speaking of Druids, while they might conjure images of Gandalf-like figures, it's worth noting that their actual historical footprint is harder to pin down. Much of their mystique comes from Roman accounts, which were often biased or outright fanciful. So why do these myths stick around like an unwelcome guest at a party? Well, they tap into something deep within us, a yearning for a simpler time when magic felt just a little more possible. It's the same reason we love a good fantasy novel or a ghost story around a campfire. Myths offer an escape, a chance to glimpse a world where the impossible might just be possible. But as enchanting as these tales are, they can obscure the real lessons that history offers. And what lessons do the Celts have for us modern folks? For one, they remind us of the power of community and identity. Celtic society was all about the tribe, about belonging to something greater than oneself. In today's world, where individualism often reigns supreme, the Celtic emphasis on community can feel like a breath of fresh air. They understood that strength lay not just in numbers, but in the bonds forged through shared experiences and storytelling. Moreover, the Celts offer a case study in resilience. Despite the Roman steamroller that flattened much of Europe, Celtic culture endured, adapting and mingling with other influences. It's a reminder that cultures, like people, are not monoliths, but ever-evolving entities. They show us that while change is inevitable, core identities can persist, echoing through time in unexpected ways. And let's not overlook their knack for storytelling, a tool as vital today as it was in those smoky Celtic roundhouses. Stories shape our understanding of the world, and the Celts knew this better than most. Their tales of heroes, guards, and adventures served not just to entertain, but to teach and bind communities. In a world now dominated by digital narratives, the ancient art of storytelling remains as relevant as ever. So, what does all this mean for us? As we navigate the complexities of modern life, the Celts offer both cautionary tales and inspiration. They remind us that no culture is immune to change, but also that adaptability and resilience are key. They show the importance of balancing innovation with tradition and the power of stories to shape identity and community. In wrapping up this wild ride through Celtic history, we're left with a rich tapestry of warriors, bards, and druids, all contributing to the fascinating mosaic that was, and is, Celtic culture. The Celts may have been subsumed by the tides of history, but their spirit endures in the symbols, stories, and sounds that continue to captivate us. Whether it's a chilling tune on the bagpipes or a gripping fantasy saga, the legacy of the Celts is alive and well, echoing through the ages with the same vibrancy as their legendary blue war paint. So, next time you find yourself swept up in a Celtic myth or tapping your foot to an Irish jig, remember, you're part of a story that began long ago, a story that continues to unfold with each turn of the page and each beat of the drum. Queen Victoria's ascent to the throne was about as unexpected as finding a T-Rex at a tea party. In a family tree that resembled more of a tangled shrub, Victoria wasn't exactly the first name on the list for the British crown. Born on May 24, 1819, to Prince Edward, Duke of Kent, and Princess Victoria of Saxe-Coburg-Saalfeld, she was thrust into the royal lardery when 3 uncles ahead of her in line failed to produce heirs. Thanks to this unexpected turn of fate, and the Grim Reaper's less than subtle involvement, an 18-year-old Victoria found herself queen. Now, Victoria's early life was anything but regal independence. Her mother, the Duchess of Kent, and her ambitious advisor, Sir John Conroy, cocooned her in what was known as the Kensington system. Think of it as helicopter parenting on steroids. Victoria was kept isolated from the court and public, her every move monitored and controlled. She couldn't even walk down the palace stairs without holding someone's hand. This wasn't just about safety, it was about control. Conroy and Victoria's mother aimed to mold her into a pliable puppet. But surprise twist, Victoria wasn't a fan of being anyone's marionette. When her uncle, King William Roman IV, died on June 20, 1837, Victoria's first act as queen was to kick Conroy to the curb. She was determined to rule without those puppet strings, and at 4 feet 11 inches, she was a small package of determination. Victoria's diaries, which she started writing at the age of 13, are a treasure trove of her thoughts, filled with candor and a surprising lack of royal polish. She wrote about everything from the annoyance of endless ceremonial obligations to her unfiltered opinions on the people around her. Her diaries are the ultimate Victorian tell-all, minus the tabloid headlines. Victoria's reign began in a period where the British Empire was on a caffeine rush of expansion. Industrialization was turning cities into smoke-belching monsters, and the sun never set on British territories, mostly because they were everywhere. Yet, the young queen's challenges weren't confined to empire building. She had to navigate the labyrinth of 19th-century politics, which was as convoluted as a Sherlock Holmes mystery, minus the charming detective to make sense of it all. One of Victoria's early political mentors was her dear uncle Leopold, the King of the Belgians. Leopold was the ultimate royal networker, the kind of guy who'd send you a Christmas card even if he barely knew you. He had a nose for power dynamics and was constantly whispering advice into Victoria's ear. But let's face it, having a Belgian uncle guide your British monarchy may have been like asking a penguin to teach you salsa dancing. It added an interesting twist to her political education, to say the least. Victorians loved their propriety almost as much as their gin. The era was defined by a rigid social code, which the Queen herself often adhered to with a mix of sincerity and skepticism. Despite popular belief, Victoria wasn't the prudish matron she's often painted as. Sure, she had her quirks, like needing to review every piece of royal correspondence personally, or her fondness for demanding the presence of her servants by a series of bell rings. But she was also refreshingly human. She enjoyed dancing, had a fierce temper, and was known for her biting wit. Once, when asked about the state of her health, she reportedly replied, "We are not amused," a line that's been misquoted more times than the average Shakespearean soliloquy. Victoria's early reign was a balancing act of asserting her authority while being a young woman in a man's world. She had to convince the political heavyweights of the day that she was more than just a crown on a pretty head. Her marriage to Prince Albert in 1840 was both a love match and a strategic alliance. Albert was not only her husband, but also her most trusted advisor, a role that helped cement her authority. Together, they navigated the political minefields, with Albert often acting as the sensible, level-headed counterpart to Victoria's more passionate impulses. The Queen's early years on the throne were also marked by a relentless schedule of public appearances, ceremonies, and receptions. Picture a royal version of speed dating, where each encounter required Victoria to nod, smile, and make polite conversation on a loop. Behind these formalities, though, was a young woman coming into her own, learning to wield her power amidst a sea of seasoned politicians and societal expectations. But let's not romanticize it too much. The Victorian era was rife with poverty, disease, and inequality. The Industrial Revolution, while a boon for some, was a Dickensian nightmare for others, with child labor, squalid living conditions, and a gap between rich and poor that was wider than the River Thames. Victoria's early reign wasn't just about balls and banquets. It was about grappling with these harsh realities and beginning to understand the immense responsibility resting on her shoulders. In many ways, Queen Victoria's transformation from sheltered princess to powerful monarch was like a real-life ugly duckling story, minus the feathers and fairy tale ending. She was a young woman thrust into a role she was scarcely prepared for, yet she rose to the occasion with a blend of tenacity, intelligence, and a dash of stubborn defiance. Her early years on the throne set the stage for a reign that would last over 6 decades, a period marked by both personal growth and profound societal change. And so, as the sun set on the early years of her reign, Queen Victoria stood firm, an emblem of continuity in an age of change. She was no longer just a sheltered girl from Kensington, but a monarch ready to leave her mark on history, quirks and all. The tale of her early reign is a testament to the complexities of power, the unpredictability of fate, and the relentless march of progress, with a few royal winks and nods thrown in for good measure. As the curtain rose on the next act of Queen Victoria's reign, the stage was set halfway across the world in India. In 1876, Victoria's status was upgraded from Queen to Empress of India, a title as grandiose as it was ironic, seeing as she'd never set foot on the subcontinent. This wasn't just a case of regal ambition. There was some serious political maneuvering behind this title upgrade, orchestrated by the Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli. If politics were a chess game, Disraeli was the grandmaster, and Victoria was his queen, quite literally. Disraeli, a man who could charm the socks off a statue, had his reasons. The British Raj, established in 1858 after the Indian Rebellion, was the crown jewel of the British Empire. But let's not romanticize it. The British Raj was less about crowns and more about squeezing the economic juice out of India. By 1876, India was a land of around 250 million people, a vast expanse filled with untapped potential and let's be honest, untapped profit. Disraeli wanted to solidify British rule by linking it more closely to the monarchy. Enter Victoria, the Empress. But here's the kicker. The title was more ceremonial than practical. It didn't change the day-to-day operations of the Raj, which were run by the Viceroy, and a bunch of bureaucrats who probably spent more time sweating in their wool suits than actually understanding local governance. Imagine trying to rule a country from over 4,000 miles away without the luxury of Google Maps or even a decent telegraph line that didn't occasionally fritz out. The logistics were, in a word, bonkers. Speaking of logistics, the British Empire had its work cut out for it maintaining control over such a massive territory. The railways, a backbone of the British economic strategy, stretched over 9,000 miles by 1,876, a steel lifeline connecting far-flung corners of the subcontinent. But these tracks weren't laid out of goodwill or Victorian benevolence. They were designed to transport goods, cotton, tea, and indigo, straight to the ports and into British hands. Economic efficiency for the Brits, yes. Prosperity for the Indians, not so much. Meanwhile, Victoria herself was perched comfortably in her palaces, blissfully detached from the realities on the ground in India. The irony of ruling over a country she'd never visited was not lost on her critics. But for Victoria, the title of Empress held a certain allure, a shiny new badge in a collection of royal honors. It's like collecting stamps, only with more political ramifications. And let's not forget the grandeur of it all. The pomp, the ceremony, the imperial swagger that came with being Empress of a land as exotic as India. Yet, the realities of the British Raj were a far cry from the romanticized vision of empire. While Victoria beamed from her throne back in India, the local population faced famines that were as devastating as they were preventable. The Great Famine of 1876-78, for instance, claimed the lives of between 5 and 10 million people, a stark reminder that the empire's priorities were often more aligned with profit margins than human welfare. The British response to these famines was often bureaucratic at best and callous at worst, with relief efforts hampered by red tape and a lack of urgency. Moreover, the empire was a patchwork quilt of princely states and British-controlled territories, each with its own set of rules and rulers. The princely states, led by local rulers, were semi-autonomous, like a bunch of mini-kingdoms, each with their own brand of chaos. The British, ever the clever strategists, kept these rulers on a tight leash, ensuring their loyalty through treaties, and when needed, a little bit of coercion. And what about the Indian population? Well, they were cogs in the vast imperial machine, their fates often dictated by policies crafted in London. For the average Indian, the British Raj was less about majestic rule and more about surviving the latest tax hike or crop failure. While the Raj brought some modernization, railways, telegraphs, and a semblance of centralized administration, it also brought restrictions, cultural impositions, and a whole new set of economic challenges. Victoria, from her cozy vantage point, could only see the empire's grandeur, not its grit. Her vision of India was crafted from reports and letters, not first-hand experience. The complexities of Indian society were distilled into neat packages of information sent through the official channels, each document a sanitized version of reality. It's a bit like watching a blockbuster movie and thinking you understand the intricacies of the plot, only to realize you've missed the entire subplot. Yet, for all its flaws, the title of Empress of India wasn't just a hollow gesture. It symbolized the height of British imperial power and the global significance of the British monarchy. For Victoria, it was the crowning glory of her reign, an acknowledgement of her role as the figurehead of an empire upon which the sun never set. And while she'd never see the bustling bazaars of Delhi or the serene beauty of the Ganges, her influence was felt across the subcontinent. In the tale of Victoria becoming Empress of India is a story of grand ambitions and even grander ironies. It's about the allure of titles and the power they represent, even when that power is exercised from a distance. It's a testament to the complexities of empire, where the romance of rule often masked the harshness of reality. As Victoria's reign continued, the title of Empress would remain a symbol of British dominance, a reminder of a time when the world was painted red with the blood, sweat, and tears of those who toiled under the imperial sun. And while Victoria herself may never have set foot on Indian soil, her legacy as empress is etched into the annals of history, a blend of majesty and misstep, progress and exploitation. As we move forward in her story, the echoes of her imperial title will resonate, colouring her reign in shades of both triumph and tragedy. As Queen Victoria basked in the glow of her imperial titles, the looming anniversaries of her reign offered the perfect excuse for the kind of lavish celebrations that make modern royal weddings look like budget picnics. Enter the Golden Jubilee of 1887 and the Diamond Jubilee of 1897, events that were less about Victoria's personal milestones and more about a not-so-subtle display of British imperial muscle. Now, the Golden Jubilee marked 50 years since Victoria took the throne, and it was a bash to rival any reality TV finale. On June 21, 1887, the streets of London transformed into one massive royal fanfare, with flags draped over every conceivable surface. The event was a veritable who's who of European royalty and foreign dignitaries. Picture this. Attendees included the German Emperor, the King of Denmark, and the King of Belgium, each with entourages that could rival a rock band's road crew. But underneath all the bunting and bunions from standing in endless lines, this was a celebration of British dominance. The empire was at its zenith, covering about 25% of the world's landmass and ruling over 400 million people. Yet the cost of this extravaganza, a cool £100,000. Today, that's roughly equivalent to £12 million, or about the GDP of a small island nation. And who picked up the tab? You guessed it, the British taxpayer, while many of their fellow subjects in the empire lived in grinding poverty. The parade was a bizarre spectacle, a smorgasbord of colonial subjects dressed in their native attire. It was as if the empire decided to host a fancy dress party and forgot to tell half the guests it wasn't a joke. Each contingent was meant to symbolize the diversity and scope of Victoria's domain, but let's be real, it was a human zoo, with the British public gawking at people from lands they'd only ever seen on maps. The irony. Many of these colonial participants were likely more familiar with the Thameses, fog than the sands of their supposed homelands, having been shipped over to play their parts in this imperial pageant. Fast forward to 1897, and it's time for the Diamond Jubilee, celebrating 60 years of Victoria's reign. This event took the opulence dial and cranked it up to 11. The procession on June 22nd was even grander, with colonial troops marching alongside British regiments in a display of military might that screamed, "We own the world." The cost, even higher than the Golden Jubilee, though historians are still piecing together just how much higher. Let's just say it was enough to make Scrooge McDuck consider a career change. This Jubilee came with a twist. Victoria, now 78 and less sprightly than a sloth in a hammock, wasn't exactly up for the public appearances. She rode in a carriage, waving regally but probably pondering if all this fuss was worth missing her afternoon tea. Her mobility issues were partly due to the length of her reign. She was, after all, the longest reigning British monarch at that time, and partly due to sheer age, the enemy of us all. The Diamond Jubilee was another chance to parade colonial subjects like exotic exhibits. The British public, who'd been raised on tales of imperial glory, saw this as a confirmation of their nation's greatness. Never mind that in places like India and parts of Africa, people were struggling with famine, disease, and the delightful side effects of colonial rule, such as economic exploitation and social upheaval. Yet, in the heart of this imperial spectacle, there were whispers of discontent. The grand parades masked the reality that the empire was a patchwork quilt held together by threads of diplomacy, coercion, and occasionally brute force. The British Empire might have been vast, but it was also vulnerable, a fact not lost on those in power. The very colonies paraded through London streets were also hotspots of unrest and resistance, with movements for self-governance simmering beneath the surface. Back in Britain, the working classes were starting to question why their hard-earned tax pennies were financing grand parades rather than improving their own dire living conditions. The Industrial Revolution had transformed cities into overcrowded hubs of industry, but had also left a trail of inequality in its wake. While the elite toasted to Queen and country, many Britons were toasting stale bread, trapped in cycles of poverty and poor health. But let's not forget the charm of these events. For Victoria, these jubilees were a testament to her longevity and the empire's reach, a celebration of a reign that had seen more change and upheaval than a plot twist in a soap opera. The romantic allure of empire was intoxicating, presenting a sanitized version of British superiority that played right into the myth of the benevolent ruler. Yet, as the sun set on these grand celebrations, the stark contrast between the pomp of the jubilees and the gritty reality of empire couldn't be ignored. The pageantry was a distraction, a smoke and mirrors act to divert attention from the cracks forming in the imperial edifice. For every jubilee float and firework, there was a colonial subject questioning their place in this grand imperial narrative. And so, as the echoes of the Diamond Jubilee faded, the empire continued its relentless march forward, a juggernaut of power and paradox. Victoria, ensconced in her royal bubble, remained the figurehead of a realm she would never truly grasp in all its complexity. Her jubilees were milestones, not just in her reign, but in the story of an empire teetering on the brink of modernity, where the lines between progress and exploitation blurred into a tapestry as intricate as the empire itself. As the curtains closed on the grandiose Jubilee celebrations, the spotlight shifted back to the personal life of Queen Victoria, a realm as intricate and dramatic as the empire she presided over. Queen Victoria's private world was a tapestry woven with deep affections, complex friendships, and the occasional whiff of scandal. And at the very heart of this tapestry was Prince Albert, the love of her life, and the man who transformed her reign. Now, if we're handing out awards for the best supporting actor in a monarchy, Prince Albert would snag the golden statuette every time. Born in a small German duchy, Albert was the kind of guy who could turn a royal ballroom into a think tank. The couple's union in 1840 was more than just a fairy tale wedding. It was a strategic alliance that brought both personal joy and political savvy to Victoria's rule. Together, they were the power couple of the 19th century, the Brangelina of their time, minus the paparazzi and tabloids, though their lives were certainly fodder for public intrigue. Albert wasn't content with just being a decorative royal arm candy. No, he dove into his role with the zeal of a kid unwrapping presents on Christmas morning. He became Victoria's closest confidant and advisor, tackling everything from the arts to architecture, and even meddling in politics when he saw fit. Under his influence, the royal family embraced a more modern, intellectual atmosphere. Think of it as Buckingham Palace meets the Renaissance. He was instrumental in organizing the Great Exhibition of 1851, a sort of World's Fair that celebrated industrial achievements and innovation. The event was a roaring success, with over 6 million visitors and profits of £186,000, a tidy sum that still leaves economists nodding approvingly. Albert's legacy as a catalyst for change was cemented in the Crystal Palace, a shimmering symbol of progress and innovation made from over 990,000 square feet of glass. It was as if he'd handed Britain a mirror to reflect its industrial might. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. The British public was initially skeptical of Albert, seeing him as an outsider meddling in their affairs. He faced criticism and suspicion, often portrayed as the German interloper with a hidden agenda. Despite this, Albert's dedication to his adopted country was unwavering. He worked tirelessly to enhance British culture, education, and industry, all while supporting Victoria in her role as queen. And then, tragedy struck. In December 1861, Albert passed away at the age of 42, leaving Victoria devastated and draped in black for the remainder of her life. His death was attributed to typhoid fever, though modern historians suggest it might have been a long-standing illness like Crohn's disease. Victoria's grief was profound and public. She became the archetype of the mourning widow, her sorrow as palpable as the shadow it cast over the monarchy. With Albert gone, Victoria retreated from public life, a recluse in her own reign. Her absence from the public eye sparked criticism and speculation. The queen, who had once been a visible emblem of the empire, became an enigma, a spectral figure haunting the halls of her palaces. It was during this period that her friendship with John Brown, a Scottish servant, came under intense scrutiny. John Brown was the type of no-nonsense Highlander who called it as he saw it. Some described him as a loyal servant, others as a confidant. but the tabloids of the day were quick to paint him as a more scandalous figure. Brown's relationship with Victoria was the 19th century equivalent of a celebrity scandal, fueling gossip mills with tales of impropriety and even secret marriages. While there's scant evidence to support these romanticized stories, the public fascination was undeniable. Brown served as a stabilizing presence for Victoria during her years of mourning. With Albert gone, Brown became the crutch she leaned on, a loyal friend who offered companionship and a dose of real-world perspective. Of course, his influence raised eyebrows among the courtiers, who were more accustomed to the polished manners of Prince Albert than Brown's rugged charm. Victoria's reliance on Brown was indicative of her need for personal connections, a stark contrast to the isolated image she projected. The public may have seen her as a distant monarch, but those within her inner circle knew her as a woman of deep emotions and fierce loyalty. Brown's presence, though controversial, underscored Victoria's humanity, a queen in need of comfort and companionship. As the years rolled on, Victoria's public image evolved from a grieving widow to a formidable matriarch, the grandmother of Europe, as she came to be known. Her children and grandchildren married into royal families across the continent, weaving a complex web of alliances that would shape European politics for decades. Her influence stretched far beyond the British Isles, a testament to the dynasty she and Albert had cultivated. Meanwhile, the myth surrounding her supposed love interests continued to swirl, adding a layer of intrigue to her legacy. Whether it was rumored dalliances with foreign dignitaries or whispers of secret romances, Victoria's personal life was a subject of endless fascination. Yet, amid the gossip and speculation, one thing remained clear. Her heart belonged to Albert, her angel, as she fondly referred to him, until her dying day. Victoria's reign, marked by profound personal loss and enduring love, was a tapestry of contradictions. She was a woman of indomitable will, yet vulnerable in her affections, a queen who wielded power with a firm hand, yet yearned for the simple comforts of companionship. Her relationships, both real and rumored, painted a portrait of a monarch deeply human, navigating the complexities of empire and emotion with equal measure. As the final act of Victoria's reign approached, her legacy was firmly entrenched in the annals of history. She had weathered the storms of personal tragedy and public scrutiny, emerging as a symbol of continuity in a rapidly changing world. Her personal relationships, from the enduring love with Albert to the controversial friendship with John Brown, were as integral to her story as the political and social upheavals of the era. And so, as the sun set on Victoria's reign, the echoes of her personal life lingered, a testament to the woman behind the crown. In the grand theatre of history, she remained a compelling character, a queen defined not just by her rule, but by the relationships that shaped her journey. As we move forward in her story, the interplay of romance and reality, myth and truth will continue to unravel, offering new insights into the legacy of Queen Victoria and the world she left behind. As we draw the curtain on the final act of Queen Victoria's reign, let's dive into the lasting ripples she left behind in the teacup of history. The Victorian era, with its grandiose imperial ambitions and complex social codes, wasn't just a chapter in Britain's story. It was the whole darn book for a good chunk of the 19th century. Victoria herself became synonymous with an era of expansion and morality, though the latter was often as flexible as a rubber band when you poked at it. First, let's debunk the myth of Victorian values. The term conjures images of prim ladies sipping tea while stern gentlemen twiddle their mustaches, all while meticulously maintaining a societal status quo. In reality, these so-called values were as much about appearances as they were about moral codes. Yes, there was an emphasis on family, hard work, and respectability, but behind the lace curtains of propriety lurked a society grappling with inequalities and hypocrisies. The Industrial Revolution had made Britain the workshop of the world, but it also turned cities into Dickensian nightmares, with child labor and poverty shadowing the nation's prosperity. Victoria herself was a paradox, a monarch who espoused traditional values while presiding over a period of massive social change. She was a symbol of stability in a world spinning faster than a top on caffeine, and her name became a shorthand for an entire era. Yet, the reality of her reign was less about moral absolutism and more about navigating the choppy waters of political and social upheaval. Her government's policies often prioritized economic gain over social justice, a fact conveniently glossed over in the romanticized version of the Victorian age. The British monarchy, under Victoria's lengthy reign, experienced a significant transformation. She managed to steer the royal ship through the tumultuous seas of changing public sentiment, ensuring the monarchy's survival in an era increasingly skeptical of inherited power. By the time she shuffled off this mortal coil in 1901, Victoria had redefined what it meant to be a constitutional monarch. She was the ultimate PR queen, wielding soft power like a velvet hammer. Her ability to adapt to the times without losing the regal mystique was a masterclass in royal rebranding. Globally, Victoria's reign was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it was the zenith of British imperialism, with the empire stretching across a quarter of the globe. The Union Jack waved proudly over territories from Canada to Australia, but let's not forget the empire's dark underbelly. Colonization often meant exploitation, with the riches of foreign lands funneled back to Britain, leaving local populations to deal with the aftermath. The British Empire was less about the noble civilizing mission and more about economic gain. The legacy of this period is a mixed bag of technological progress and cultural imposition, with the scars of colonial rule still visible today. On the home front, Victoria's death marked the end of an era. The turn of the century brought new challenges as Britain grappled with its place in a rapidly modernizing world. The Edwardian era that followed attempted to shake off some of the Victorian stiffness, but the weight of her legacy was hard to escape. Her influence lingered, ghost at the feast of modernity, reminding the British of a time when their empire was the envy of the world. Even today, the echoes of Victoria's reign can be heard in modern Britain. The royal family, now a staple of tabloid headlines and royal weddings watched by millions, owes much of its current form to Victoria's savvy navigation of public life. Her legacy is a complicated tapestry, woven with threads of tradition and change, power and paradox. The British monarchy, for all its pomp and ceremony, remains a symbol of continuity in a world that refuses to stand still. As we reflect on the Victorian era, it's clear that the myth and reality of Queen Victoria's reign are two sides of the same coin. She was a monarch who embodied the contradictions of her time, a symbol of stability in an age of upheaval, a figurehead of an empire built on both progress and exploitation. Her legacy is as complex as the woman herself, a testament to the enduring allure of power and the intricate dance between myth and history. And so, as we close the book on Queen Victoria's story, we are left with a portrait of a queen who was both a product and a shaper of her time. Her reign was a symphony of triumphs and tragedies, a testament to human resilience and the relentless march of history. Victoria's legacy, like the empire she presided over, is a collection of contradictions, an era defined by its grandeur and its grit, its romantic allure and its harsh realities. And as we drift off with this newfound knowledge, we can appreciate the ironies and insights that history, with its wry sense of humor, never fails to provide. In the sweltering heat of ancient Greece, where olive oil wasn't just for salad, but also for wrestling, the first Olympic Games kicked off in 776 BC. Now, if you think modern sports are intense, just wait until you hear about these ancient feats of strength and endurance. No cameras, no commercial breaks, just raw human competition, where the only doping scandal involved a few too many figs. The Olympics were born in Olympia, a site sacred to Zeus, the greatest of the mighty Greek gods. These games weren't just about flexing muscles, though there was plenty of that. They were steeped in religious and political motivations. Picture this. Greece wasn't a unified country, but a patchwork quilt of city-states, each with its own ambitions and occasional grudges. Enter the Olympics, a grand spectacle where even the most quarrelsome of these states could hit pause on their bickering. As bizarre as it sounds, the Games were a peace treaty in disguise. The so-called Olympic truce allowed athletes, spectators, and even the most fervent fans to travel safely to Olympia. Spartans, Athenians, Corinthians, all converged here, temporarily shelving their swords and shields. It was an ancient ceasefire wrapped in athletic competition. Imagine if the Super Bowl called for world peace every year. Now that's a halftime show worth tuning in for. But let's not be too starry-eyed. The Olympics were as much a logistical nightmare as they were a divine calling. First off, the cost of hosting these games was no small change. City-states vied for the honor, not unlike cities today bidding for the modern Olympics. They had to shell out for infrastructure, feasts, and of course, the grandiose ceremonies to please the guards and the throngs of spectators. If you think hosting a modern event strains a budget, try doing it with drachmas and temple donations. And then there was the small matter of getting everyone to Olympia. Forget first-class flights or even economy-class discomfort. Athletes and fans had to journey on foot, horseback, or if they were lucky, by chariot. The distance from Athens to Olympia, for instance, was around 340 kilometers. That's roughly the equivalent of walking from New York City to Baltimore, but with fewer rest stops and more bandits along the way. Once they arrived, accommodation was another story. Think less five-star hotel, more ancient urban, where rustic didn't just mean exposed beams, but also open skies. Participants camped out in makeshift tents or squeezed into overcrowded inns, rubbing elbows with rivals and allies alike. The hospitality industry had yet to invent room service, but at least there was no Wi-Fi to complain about. The games themselves were a glorious mix of the familiar and the bizarre. The track events, for instance, featured sprints like the Stadion, a 192-meter dash that was the centerpiece of the festivities. There was also the Diajulos, a double-length race, and the Delichos, a long-distance run that could stretch up to 800 meters. But it wasn't all about running. The pentathlon combined wrestling, long jump, javelin throw, discus throw, and a foot race. Because why specialize when you can do it all? And let's not forget the pancration, a no-holds-barred combat sport that makes modern MMA look like a pillow fight. Biting and eye-gouging were technically banned, but enforcement was, shall we say, lenient. It was a brutal reminder that ancient sports were as much about survival as skill. Despite the harsh realities, the romance of the ancient Olympics endures. They were not just games, but a powerful symbol of unity, a testament to human strength and perseverance. They showcased the best and worst of humanity, ambition, rivalry, camaraderie, and the undeniable need to prove oneself, not just to peers, but also to the guards watching from above. But in the end, it was always about more than just winning. It was about coming together, if only for a moment, to celebrate the shared human spirit. Now, let's lace up those ancient sandals and dive into the sporting events themselves. Foot races were the bread and butter of the Olympics, and by bread and butter, I mean olive oil and barley, because carbs have always been an athlete's best friend. The Stadion race, a brisk 192-meter sprint, was the crowd favorite, as it was short enough to keep everyone's attention, but long enough to prove your mettle. Picture the scene. Muscular men lined up at the starting line, their oiled bodies glistening in the sunlight, ready to bolt at the sound of the trumpet. It was the ancient equivalent of the 100-meter dash, minus the lycra bodysuits and endorsement deals. But if you thought a single lap was too easy, the Diajulos doubled the distance and doubled the fun, or the agony, depending on your stamina. This race required competitors to dash to one end of the stadium, perform a swift turn around a post, and sprint back. Think of it as a precursor to the modern-day shuttle run, but with less gym-class embarrassment. For those with a taste for endurance, the Delichos was the marathon of its day, covering distances up to 800 meters. In a time before energy gels and isotonic drinks, athletes relied on sheer willpower and the occasional fig to fuel their journey. It was a test of endurance, both physical and mental, as runners circled the stadium multiple times, the cheers of spectators pushing them onward. Then there was wrestling, sport that transformed the Olympic grounds into a sandy battlefield. Forget the choreographed spectacle of modern wrestling. This was a gritty, bare-knuckle contest where the goal was to force your opponent's shoulders to the ground. The wrestlers competed naked, which was less about showing off and more about practicality. There was nothing for your opponent to grab onto. The rules were simple but brutal. Win by pinning your opponent or forcing them to concede. It was a test of strength, strategy, and a bit of intimidation. If you think trash-talking in sports is a modern invention, just imagine the psychological warfare at play when your opponent is trying to twist you into a human pretzel under the Mediterranean sun. The pentathlon, a 5-part event, was the ultimate test of an athlete's versatility. It included the aforementioned Stadion, wrestling, long jump, javelin throw, and discus throw. Winning this event meant you were not just the fastest or the strongest, but the most well-rounded athlete of your time. The long jump was a graceful leap, aided by handheld weights called halters, which were swung to help achieve greater distance. The discus throw, meanwhile, required both strength and finesse as competitors spun and hurled a circular stone disc as far as possible. The javelin, a spear-like weapon, had to be thrown with precision, as it was both a test of distance and accuracy. It was the ancient world's decathlon, minus the pole vault, and with a lot more sand in uncomfortable places. And then there was the pancration, the no-holds-barred contest that would make even the toughest UFC fighter flinch. It was a chaotic blend of boxing and wrestling with only 2 rules, no biting and no eye gouging. Anything else was fair game. With its emphasis on submission holds and strikes, pancration was as much about survival as it was about victory. Imagine a sport where every bout could be your last, and you'll get a sense of the stakes. Choking was allowed, and the only way to signal defeat was to raise a finger. It was gladiatorial combat without the lions, a raw, visceral demonstration of the fight-or-flight instinct where flight was never an option. Despite the romantic notion of amateur athletes competing for the love of Zeus and glory, the truth was a bit more materialistic. Athletes weren't just in it for the laurel wreaths. Cash prizes and lucrative rewards awaited the victors. City-states lavished their champions with gifts, money, and lifelong privileges. Winning an Olympic event could exempt you from taxes, earn you free meals for life, and even better than a golden trophy, eternal bragging rights. It was less about the glory of competition and more about the tangible benefits. In a world where status was everything, Olympic victory was the ultimate social elevator. The rules of these games, while seemingly straightforward, were strictly enforced. Infractions were punished with fines, public flogging, or in some cases, exclusion from future games. The judges, known as Hellenardikai, were the final arbiters, and they took their roles seriously. They had the authority to impose penalties and ensure the games remained fair, or as fair as possible, given the human penchant for bending rules. The athletes swore an oath to Zeus, promising to abide by the regulations, and maintaining the integrity of the games was paramount. There were no VAR replays or appeals. Once the judges made a decision, it was final. So why all this emphasis on strict rules and harsh punishments? Well, in a society where honor and reputation were everything, the games were a microcosm of the larger world. Cheating was not just a personal failing, but a stain on one's city-state. The stakes were high, both politically and personally. The Olympic Games were a stage where the Greeks showcased their values, their prowess, and their ambitions. It was a place where reputations were made and unmade, where the line between hero and villain was drawn in the sand of Olympia. While we remember the Olympics for their ideals, it's crucial to remember that behind the glory were real people with real motivations. They were not just competing for the gods, but for themselves and their future. In this way, the ancient Olympics were not so different from today's games. They were a reflection of humanity's constant quest for recognition and legacy, a reminder that while times have changed, the core of what drives us remains remarkably the same. As we continue this journey through the ancient Olympics, remember that these games were more than just contests. They were a canvas upon which the Greeks painted their aspirations, their rivalries, and their dreams. The ancient Olympics were as much about human ambition as they were about divine spectacle, a place where athletes not only chased glory, but also sought out accolades that could transform their lives. But let's peel back the layers of this idealized past and dive into the gritty reality of what it took to become an Olympic athlete in the ancient world. Spoiler alert, it involved a lot more than just lifting weights and eating kale salads. Training for the Olympics was a full-time job, and athletes in ancient Greece devoted their lives to the pursuit of victory. Picture this. Young men, often from wealthy families, were sent to specialized training schools called gymnasiums. Far from the modern air-conditioned facilities with complimentary towels, these were open-air arenas where sweat, sand, and ambition mixed freely. Here, they honed their skills under the watchful eyes of trainers known as paider-tribes. These trainers were the ancient equivalent of personal coaches, and while they didn't have Instagram followers, they wielded considerable influence over their proteges. Athletic training was a serious business, with regimens that would make even the most dedicated of today's athletes balk. Imagine waking up at the crack of dawn to sprint, wrestle, and throw discus until the sun dipped below the horizon. Resting on your laurels was not an option, and the pressure to perform was immense. The ancient Greeks believed in the harmony of body and mind, but let's be honest, the body got a lot of the attention. The pursuit of arete, or excellence, was the goal, and it was as much about physical prowess as it was about moral virtue. Now, let's talk diet, because even back then, what you ate was just as important as how much you could bench press. Forget protein shakes and quinoa bowls. Ancient athletes followed a diet rich in barley, dried figs, and cheese. Meat was a luxury, reserved for the wealthy or special occasions, so don't expect a paleo menu. Instead, athletes consumed large quantities of bread and olives, the ancient Mediterranean staples. Legend has it that one athlete, Milo of Croton, consumed 20 pounds of meat and an equal amount of bread daily. Whether this was an exaggeration or not is debatable, but it paints a vivid picture of the ancient appetite. But the diet wasn't just about the calories. It was about the potions, too. Athletes often consumed tonics believed to enhance strength and stamina. These concoctions ranged from the mildly palatable to the downright bizarre. Think potions made from animal organs or herbal mixtures said to channel the power of the gods. The ancient Greeks had their own version of performance enhancers, and while they might not have been scientifically effective, the belief in their power was enough to fuel many a competitive spirit. Of course, the image of the noble, self-sacrificing athlete, competing for the love of sport and country, is a bit of a historical romanticism. The truth is, the ancient Olympics were rife with competition, and not just on the track. Rivalries ran deep, and the stakes were high. Winning an Olympic event could bring fame, fortune, and a permanent place in history. It's no wonder, then, that some athletes resorted to less than honorable tactics to ensure victory. Bribery and match-fixing were as much a part of the ancient games as the events themselves. Athletes and city-states alike were known to engage in under-the-table dealings, offering money or favors in exchange for outcomes. The Hellenodici, or judges, were tasked with upholding the integrity of the games, but human nature being what it is, some were susceptible to persuasion. The myth of pure competition crumbles when you realize that some victories may have been bought rather than earned. One infamous scandal involved the pentathlon, where an athlete named Calipus was found guilty of bribing his competitors to throw the event. The result, a hefty fine and a tarnished reputation. But here's the kicker. The fine was paid by his city-state, not him personally, highlighting the political stakes involved. The Greeks didn't just see the Olympics as a personal achievement. It was a matter of civic pride, and sometimes cities were willing to pay a premium for the glory. And what about the spectators? Imagine the reaction of an ancient audience to today's sports stars and their antics. In an era where the games were intertwined with religious fervor and national pride, the modern spectacle of athletes with multimillion-dollar endorsements and off-field controversies would likely be both baffling and thrilling. The Greeks appreciated a good show, and while they might raise an eyebrow at the commercialism, they'd likely revel in the drama. The ancient Olympics were more than just a series of events. They were an arena for human drama, where ambition and morality clashed on the sands of Olympia. Behind the romantic veneer lies a world that was as competitive and complex as any we know today. These athletes weren't just sculpted bodies and noble hearts. They were real people with all the messiness that entails. They schemed, they strategized, and they sometimes crossed lines in pursuit of victory. And while we may never know all the details, it's clear that the games were a reflection of humanity in all its flawed glory. So, as we continue to unravel the stories of the ancient Olympics, remember that the lines between hero and villain, noble and ignoble, were often as blurred then as they are now. The games were a stage where the Greeks played out their ambitions, their rivalries, and their dreams. And in that arena, just as in life, the quest for excellence was never simple or straightforward. It was a journey fraught with challenges, triumphs, and the occasional scandal. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the world of ancient sport, where each story offers new insights into the human spirit, both its brilliance and its blemishes. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. There's a whole world outside the dusty tracks and sand pits of Olympia that felt the ripple effects of these games. You see, the ancient Olympics weren't just about who could run the fastest or wrestle the hardest. Oh no, they were a cultural extravaganza that seeped into every corner of Greek life, from art to politics, like olive oil on a fresh piece of bread. First off, let's talk about art. The Olympics were a muse for sculptors and painters who couldn't resist capturing the raw athleticism and divine physiques of the competitors. Artists like Phidias and Praxiteles were inspired by these events, creating statues that didn't just depict muscle-bound athletes, but celebrated the ideal human form. The Discobolus of Myron, for instance, is a sculpture that freezes an athlete mid-launch, perfectly balancing tension and grace. It's like the stop motion of its day, minus the camera. And let's not forget the poets. Lyric poets such as Pindar composed odes that were the ancient equivalent of sports commentary. These weren't your average limericks. They were grand epics that celebrated victories and immortalized athletes in verse. Pindar's work was so revered that his poems were often inscribed on monuments or recited at banquets. You could say he was the Barb Costas of his time, albeit with a bit more meter. But the Olympics weren't just about flexing biceps and lyrical prowess. They had a political edge sharper than a Spartan spear. The Games were a convenient venue for political maneuvering, alliances, and power plays. City-states would parade their athletes like prized show ponies, each victory a diplomatic triumph. Winning at Olympia wasn't merely a personal achievement, but a communal one that brought honor, and sometimes leverage, to a city-state. Think of it as a diplomatic dance-off with a bit more oil and fewer sequins. Now, let's pivot to a topic that's as intriguing as it is contentious: the role of women in these games. If you think the Olympics were a bastion of equality, think again. Women were largely sidelined from the main event, relegated to the role of spectators, or banned entirely, depending on who you ask. The men-only policy was so strict that any married woman caught sneaking a peek at the games risked a one-way trip off Mount Typium. Talk about harsh penalties. But women weren't entirely absent from the athletic sphere. Enter the Heraean Games, an event held in honor of Hera, Zeus's better half. These were the Olympics' little sister, where young, unmarried women competed in foot races. The winners were awarded olive wreaths and got to dedicate statues to Hera. But let's be honest, it wasn't quite the same as the main event. Still, it was a step, albeit a small one, toward female participation in athletics. Now, if you're wondering about inclusivity, prepare for a hard truth. The ancient Olympics were about as inclusive as an exclusive club with a velvet rope. Only freeborn Greek males could compete, leaving slaves and foreigners out in the cold. Even within Greece, not all city-states were equally represented. It often boiled down to who could afford to send their athletes to compete. So much for the democratic ideals of ancient Greece, more like a high-stakes boys' club with limited membership. Yet, for all its exclusivity, the Olympics did provide a rare opportunity for individuals to rise above their station. A successful athlete could transcend his humble origins, gaining fame and fortune that might otherwise have been unattainable. The Games offered a sliver of social mobility, a chance to break free from the rigid class structures that defined Greek society. Let's not forget the spectators, who were as much a part of the Olympian tapestry as the athletes themselves. The Games drew multitudes from across the Hellenic world, creating a melting pot of cultures, dialects, and currencies. It was a place where people from different city-states mingled, exchanged ideas, and occasionally threw a punch or two. It wasn't just an athletic event. It was a festival of human interaction, a real-life agora where the social and political dynamics of the time were on full display. So, as we continue our journey through the ancient Olympics, remember that these games were more than just feats of strength and agility. They were a cultural phenomenon that transcended the boundaries of the stadium, influencing art, politics, and society at large. They were a reflection of the Greek world, with all its virtues and vices, aspirations and anxieties. In every race and every match, there was a story waiting to be told, a story that continues to captivate us, even millennia later. As we delve deeper, keep your eyes peeled for the unexpected twists and turns that make history as unpredictable as an ancient chariot race. As the dust settled on the ancient games, the era of gods and glory slowly faded, leaving room for the rise of a new power, Rome. Now, if you think the Romans were content with just arenas and gladiators, think again. They had their eyes on the ultimate prize, the cultural dominance of the Hellenic world. But this wasn't a simple case of one civilization borrowing another's toys. It was a full-blown cultural takeover with the subtlety of a chariot crash. The decline of the ancient Olympics wasn't a dramatic fall from grace. It was more like a gradual fade into obscurity, helped along by the shifting priorities of a Roman Empire that had its own ideas about entertainment. By 393 AD, Emperor Theodosius I, in a bid to strengthen Christianity as the empire's unifying religion, declared the game's pagan practices unfit for his vision of a Christian empire. The Olympics, once a symbol of divine favor and human achievement, found themselves at odds with this new religious order. It's as if the Super Bowl was suddenly deemed unholy. Imagine the outcry. But let's not pretend the Olympics were thriving just before Theodosius pulled the plug. By then, the Games had already lost much of their luster. The political landscape had shifted. The city-states that once vied for honor and bragging rights were now mere provinces in a sprawling Roman Empire. The spirit of competition had dulled, tarnished by a blend of apathy and the empire's own brand of bread and circuses. Why run a marathon when you could watch gladiators duke it out in the Colosseum, complete with all the gore and spectacle the Romans adored? Economically, the Games were a shadow of their former selves. The cost of maintaining the facilities at Olympia, not to mention the decline in funding from city-states now under Roman rule, meant that less money was available to keep the Games alive and vibrant. As fewer athletes and spectators made the trek to Olympia, the infrastructure crumbled, and the once bustling site became a relic of a bygone era. It was like letting a stadium rot while the world moved on to bigger, flashier venues. Yet, despite their decline, the legacy of the ancient Olympics was far from dead. Fast forward a millennia or so, and you'll find the modern Games, reborn in 1896, with a little help from Pierre de Coubertin, a French baron with a flair for nostalgia and a vision for international unity. De Coubertin was captivated by the idea of reviving the Olympics, not just as a sporting event, but as a global peace initiative. Think of him as the original sports diplomat, blending athletic competition with a dash of idealism. The modern Olympics, though inspired by their ancient predecessor, were a different beast altogether. They embraced inclusivity, inviting athletes from around the world to compete in a variety of sports that would have bewildered the ancient Greeks. Snowboarding, anyone. They also embraced the concept of amateurism, although the financial stakes have grown to levels that would make an ancient Greek's head spin. Sponsorships, media rights, and commercial deals have transformed the Games into a global spectacle, far removed from the humble olive wreaths of Olympia. But let's not kid ourselves. Modern athletes are driven by many of the same motivations as their ancient counterparts. Sure, they may not be vying for tax exemptions or lifetime meals, but the quest for fame, fortune, and legacy remains. The dedication, the training, the pressure to perform. These are threads that connect the athletes of today with those who competed thousands of years ago. The myth of pure amateurism, much like the myth of noble competition, often crumbles under the weight of reality. And yet, for all the differences, the Olympics remain a powerful symbol of unity and human achievement. They remind us of our shared history, our enduring love for competition, and our capacity for both great triumphs and equally great follies. The allure of the Olympics lies in this duality, the romance of the ideal and the gritty reality of the human condition. It's a narrative as old as time itself, one that continues to captivate and inspire. As we wrap up this journey through the sands of Olympia and beyond, it's worth pondering the balance of myth and reality that has shaped the enduring appeal of the Olympics. The Games have always been more than just sporting events. They've been a canvas for human ambition, a stage for cultural exchange, and a mirror reflecting society's values and contradictions. They are a testament to our unyielding desire to compete, to excel, and to connect with each other through the universal language of sport. So, the next time you watch an athlete cross the finish line, remember the long, winding road that led to that moment. From the dusty tracks of ancient Greece to the world stage of today, the Olympics are a reminder that while empires may rise and fall, the human spirit's quest for excellence endures. And that, my friends, is a legacy worth celebrating. In the age of corsets and crinolines, Victorian balls were the high society equivalent of a trending TikTok video. except with more waltzing and less lip-syncing. Picture a world where your popularity wasn't measured by blue check marks or follow accounts, but by the number of dance cards filled with names. The clique of the 19th century was as exclusive as the VIP section of a modern club, albeit with considerably more lace and fewer neon lights. Today, we're diving headfirst into the hoop-skirted whirl of these grand events and the colossal effort that went into making them happen. First off, let's talk venues. You couldn't just throw a ball in your average parlor like it was a casual house party. No, to really make an impression, you needed a setting as grand as your ambitions. Enter Almac's Assembly Rooms in London, the creme de la creme of ballrooms. To secure a spot here, you needed more than just a hefty purse. You required the nod of approval from the almighty patronesses, a group of 6 formidable women who effectively held the keys to the kingdom. If they deemed you worthy, congratulations. You just gained access to the social event of the season. If not, well, better luck next year, old chap. Now, hosting a ball wasn't for the faint of heart or light of wallet. It was a financial endeavor that could easily rival the cost of a small wedding today. We're talking about a price tag that could reach around £1,000. A staggering figure when you consider the average annual income at the time was about £50. Adjusted for modern inflation, you're looking at something akin to blowing several months' rent on a single evening of twirling and small talk. The financial gymnastics required would impress even the most seasoned of Wall Street brokers. Behind the glittering facade, an unseen army was toiling away to ensure the event went off without a hitch. Servants were the unsung heroes of the Victorian social scene, navigating a minefield of logistics that would make even NASA mission control break into a sweat. From polishing every piece of silverware to preparing a feast fit for a king, or at least a viscount, the work was relentless. Picture Edwardian Downton Abbey minus the relative glamour, a bustling hive of activity, with each servant knowing their precise role in the symphony of service. And the details, oh the details. Everything from the floral arrangements to the selection of music had to be just right. Heaven forbid the wrong tune should be played, sending the dancers into a frenzy of misplaced steps. And speaking of music, only the finest orchestras would do. Hiring a band wasn't just about picking up the local garage group. You needed professionals who could keep the rhythm as precise as the ticking of a pocket watch. Then there was the guest list, a veritable who's who of societal power players, all of whom had to be meticulously vetted. Inviting the wrong person could lead to scandal, while forgetting to invite the right one could mean social suicide. Not to mention the subtle politics involved in who got to dance with whom, which was a mini-diplomatic affair all on its own. One wrong move, and you might find yourself the subject of hushed whispers and raised eyebrows come morning. But let's not ignore the elephant, or should I say, the peacock, in the room, fashion. The sartorial choices weren't just for vanity. They were a statement, a declaration of one's position in the social hierarchy. Gowns were no less than works of art, often costing more than a servant's annual wage, and tailored with such precision that any wardrobe malfunction could send ripples through the crowd. A well-dressed lady or gentleman could make or break their reputation with a single look, a concept that, for all our modern evolution, hasn't changed much. So, while the romantic image of a Victorian ball might conjure images of candlelit elegance and graceful twirls, the reality was a bit more cutthroat. It was an arena where wealth, influence, and charm danced a perilous waltz, each step carefully choreographed to maintain one's place in the upper echelons of society. And if you think that sounds stressful, well, you're not wrong. But then again, who wouldn't endure a little anxiety for a chance to be the belle or beau of the ball? Ah, the guest list. The social currency of the Victorian ball scene, where getting your name on the list was like scoring a golden ticket to Willy Wonka's factory, except instead of chocolate rivers, you got rivers of champagne and gossip. To say that being invited was a big deal would be like saying the Great Fire of London was a bit of a bonfire. It was enormous. This wasn't just about a night of dancing. It was about staking your claim in the social hierarchy. Now, not just anyone could waltz through those grand doors. You couldn't simply flash a pearly smile and expect to glide in like you were walking into a local pub. No, invitations were a complex dance of their own, dictated by a web of social stratification as intricate as a spider's web. You see, the guest list was curated with the precision of a Swiss watch, taking into account not only who was who, but also who wasn't who they said they were. A genuine pedigree was your golden ticket, and heaven help you if your lineage was a bit murky. The unspoken rules governing these invitations were as rigid as a Victorian corset. If you were part of the aristocracy, an invitation was almost assured, unless, of course, you had committed some unforgivable faux pas, like wearing the wrong shade of gloves to tea. But for those on the fringes of high society, an invitation was the ultimate validation. It was like getting not just a blue checkmark, but a platinum one, signaling to the world that you had arrived. In this grand theater of social maneuvering, the stakes were high. The consequences of being snubbed were dire. Your absence from the event could send tongues wagging faster than a telegraph, marking you as yesterday's news. And let's not forget the political undercurrents that swirled beneath the ballroom's polished surface. A single waltz could make or break alliances, much like a modern-day political summit, but with more silk and less small talk about tariffs. Take, for instance, the Prince of Wales, the future King Edward VII. His presence at a ball could elevate its status from a mere social gathering to the asterisk event of the decade. Known for his charm and sartorial flair, the prince was the 19th century's answer to a celebrity influencer. When he entered a room, trends were set, and reputations were made or dashed in the blink of an eye. If he deemed you worthy of a dance, you might as well have won the social lottery. But if he turned his back, well, better luck next season. And let's not overlook the intricate dance of introductions that accompanied these events. Making the right connections was as vital as the air you breathed, and a poorly executed introduction could lead to social catastrophe. The key was to secure introductions to the right people, those who could open doors to even more exalted circles. It was networking in its most elegant form, a linked-in connection request draped in velvet and lace. The politics of the dance floor were no less treacherous. Each dance was a strategic maneuver, akin to a game of chess, but with more spinning and less checkmating. Who you danced with mattered, and partners were chosen with the care of a diplomat selecting an envoy. A dance with the right person could elevate your status, while a misstep could send you tumbling down the social ladder faster than you could say faux pas. In this world, appearances were everything, and the stakes were as high as the towering hairstyles of the day. A misjudged step, a poorly timed comment, or a sartorial slip could unravel the carefully woven tapestry of one's social standing. Yet, for all its cutthroat nature, the Victorian ball remained an enchanting spectacle, a dazzling display of elegance and ambition where dreams were spun as finely as the silks adorning the dancers. So, while it might be easy to romanticize these grand affairs as nothing more than a frothy dalliance of ruffles and romance, they were, in fact, a complex social ecosystem. An ecosystem where each invitation was a badge of honor, each dance a calculated step in the dance of life, and each whispered word a potential declaration of war or peace. And as we mark our place on the dance card of history, let's remember the swirling chaos beneath those glittering chandeliers, because behind every elegant bow and curtsy lay a world of intrigue and ambition, as relentless as it was resplendent. Just as the final chords of a waltz fade into the night, the fashion frenzy of a Victorian ball bursts into the spotlight, dazzling and dizzying in equal measure. If you think today's red carpet events are the epitome of sartorial splendor, think again. The Victorians were the original fashionistas, and their balls were nothing short of a couture circus, where the price tag of a single gown could put a modern luxury car to shame. We're talking costs that could reach upwards of £100 for a single dress, in an era where a skilled worker might earn £50 in a year. That's like dropping a cool $10,000 on a gown today. Not exactly a budget-friendly wardrobe edition. Let's dive into the fabrics that made these gowns so jaw-droppingly expensive. Silk, satin, velvet, and tulle were the fabrics of choice, each hand-selected to shimmer under the flickering glow of gaslights. A lady's gown was her suit of armor, her statement piece, a walking advertisement of her family's wealth and social standing. It was a visual brag-fest, and the more elaborate the design, the louder the bragging rights. These creations were often embellished with lace, ribbons, and beadwork, not to mention the occasional plume or two, adding layers of complexity and cost. The piece de resistance, an array of accessories including gloves, tiaras, and fans, each piece meticulously chosen to complete the ensemble. However, all this finery came with its own set of challenges. Enter the corset, the Victorian era's answer to a personal trainer. It cinched, squeezed, and lifted, creating the coveted hourglass shape, but at a price. Breathing became optional. The corset was the original waist trainer, minus the Instagram sponsorship. Women were expected to endure this rib-crushing garment for hours on end, all in the name of beauty. It was as if someone looked at the human body and thought, what if we just moved everything around a little bit? And let's not forget the crinoline, that colossal cage of fabric that transformed skirts into something resembling a bell tower. This fashion marvel allowed skirts to balloon out to epic proportions, making doorways and sitting an adventure sport. Imagine trying to navigate a crowded ballroom while wearing what amounts to a wearable tent. It's no wonder these gatherings were held in such expansive venues. How else could you accommodate all that fabric and the egos to match? Despite the obvious impracticalities, crinolines were all the rage, proving that fashion has always required a certain level of sacrifice. Now, let's address the elephant, or rather the peacock, in the room, the role of fashion as a social ladder. In the stratified world of the 19th century, clothes were more than just garments. They were a language, a currency, a means of social mobility. A well-dressed woman could catch the eye of a potential suitor, or at the very least, avoid the dreaded label of dowdy. A man in a finely tailored suit could negotiate business deals and form alliances, all without uttering a word. Yet, beneath the layers of tulle and velvet, there lurked a less glamorous reality. The labor behind these opulent outfits was intense, with seamstresses working long hours under candlelight, their livelihoods precariously hinging on the whims of fashion trends. The fashion industry, much like today, was a beast that devoured resources and spat out trends faster than you could say bustle. It was a world where appearances were everything, but reality was often as corseted as the bodies beneath those gowns. So, while the romanticized image of a Victorian ball conjures visions of elegance and grace, the reality was a bit more, shall we say, constricting. The fashion of the time was both a spectacle and a statement, a testament to the lengths people would go to maintain their place in the social pecking order. It was a world where style and status danced a delicate waltz, each step fraught with the potential for triumph or disaster. In this grand theater of fashion, every detail mattered, from the cut of a gown to the way a glove was worn. The stakes were as high as the towering hairstyles, and the pressure to conform was as relentless as the gaslights illuminating the night. As we peel back the layers of lace and satin, we find a world that was as beautiful as it was bewildering, a testament to the enduring power of fashion to captivate and confound. So, as we turn the page on this chapter of history, we see that the Victorian ball was not just a dance, but a dazzling display of ambition and artistry, where the clothes were the stars of the show, and the people merely players in a drama of their own making. And while the fashion may have changed, the desire to dress to impress remains as timeless as ever. And speaking of the stars of the show, let's shift the spotlight to the true linchpins of any Victorian ball worth its salt, the music and dance. These weren't just mere pastimes. They were the very pulse of the evening, dictating the evening's tempo, and by extension, the social fortunes of those in attendance. Imagine the scene, an orchestra tuning up, the soft hum of anticipation in the air, and the rustle of silk as partners lined up to take their places on the floor. It was a symphony of status, where every note and step carried more weight than an influencer's latest post. Orchestras of the time were the unsung heroes, belting out everything from lively polkas to the more subdued quadrilles. They were the DJs of their day, tasked with keeping the energy alight while ensuring not a single misplaced note threw the dancers into chaos. Hiring a top-notch orchestra was a non-negotiable expense, akin to booking a headliner for Coachella in today's terms. We're talking about ensembles that could cost a cool £50 for the night, a small fortune when you remember the average annual income hovered around £50 as well. But could you really put a price on social success? Apparently not. Now, let's dive into the main event, the dance card. This little piece of stationery was as coveted as a golden ticket to the social elite. Ladies would carry them like prized possessions, meticulously planning their evening's dance partners with the precision of a military strategist. It was like social chess, where each partner was a move on the board, and every dance had the potential to forge alliances or ignite rivalries. The dance card was more than just a schedule. It was a map to navigate the labyrinthine world of Victorian social politics. The dances themselves were a fascinating reflection of the era's societal norms. Take the waltz, for instance, a dance so scandalous at its inception that it was practically the equivalent of PDA at a high school prom. Before it gained acceptance, the intimate hold required for the waltz had many a Victorian matron clutching her pearls. But once it caught on, it became the dance of choice for those looking to make a splash on the social scene. The embrace of the waltz can be seen as society's way of loosening its tight corset strings, just a little. Then there was the quadrille, a dance that acted like a social icebreaker, allowing participants to mingle with multiple partners in a single set. It was the speed dating of its time, minus the awkward small talk about hobbies and favorite books. The quadrille was all about precision and teamwork, and its intricate steps required a level of coordination that could rival a marching band at halftime. This dance was the ultimate test of social grace and agility, with dancers twirling like a finely tuned clockwork mechanism. But let's not sugarcoat the situation. Mastering these dances was no small feat. The pressure to perform without a hitch was immense, especially under the watchful eyes of the upper crust. Imagine the horror of stepping on your partner's toes, or worse, losing your footing altogether. It was a high-stakes game where one misstep could lead to social ruin, or at least a very awkward morning-after conversation. For the wallflowers of the evening, the dance floor was a battlefield fraught with potential faux pas. And let's face it, not everyone was born with 2 left feet. Some had 3. Dance instructors made a killing from those desperate to avoid humiliation. These teachers were the unsung saviors of many a young debutante, offering lessons at around 10 shillings an hour. That's a hefty sum when you consider the economic realities of the time, but worth every penny if it meant avoiding the shame of a ballroom blunder. In this context, the music and dance at Victorian balls were more than just entertainment. They were social crucibles where the norms of the day were both upheld and challenged. While some dances reinforced the status quo, others offered a fleeting glimpse of social rebellion, a chance for individuals to express themselves in a world that often demanded conformity. The dance floor was a paradoxical space where decorum met daring, and every step was a delicate balance between tradition and innovation. As we waltz through this exploration of Victorian balls, it becomes clear that beneath the veneer of elegance lay a world driven by ambition, intrigue, and the relentless pursuit of social capital. The music and dance were not mere distractions. They were the lifeblood of these gatherings, setting the rhythm for a society constantly in motion. And while we may romanticize these grand affairs as relics of a bygone era, the truth is they were as complex and cutthroat as any modern social scene. So, in unraveling the intricate tapestry of a Victorian ball, we find a world where each note and step held the power to elevate or devastate, a world where the dance was both a literal and metaphorical journey through the labyrinth of social expectations and aspirations. As we prepare to leave this glittering ballroom behind, we do so with the understanding that while the music may have faded, the echoes of those elegant evenings continue to resonate through history. And as the echoes of those elegant evenings continue to resonate through history, let's swivel our focus from the dance floor to the dollars, or rather, the pounds behind the grandeur. Ever wonder who truly benefited from a Victorian ball? Spoiler alert, it wasn't just the guests flouncing about in their silk and satin. The local economy got a slice of the action too, and that slice was substantial. First up, the dressmakers and tailors who were the unsung engines of this social spectacle, stitching opulence one bead at a time. These artisans, often tucked away in dimly lit workshops, were the magicians who transformed bolts of fabric into works of art. The demand for their skills soared like a hot air balloon, with ball season fueling a veritable textile gold rush. A single gown could cost upwards of £100, and when you consider the average annual wage was about £50, it's no wonder these seamstresses were the rock stars of their day, albeit without the groupies or world tours. But it wasn't just the fashion world that cashed in. Think about the florists, chefs, and musicians, each a cog in the well-oiled machine of Victorian social life. Florists crafted arrangements that rivaled the hanging gardens of Babylon, while chefs conjured feasts that could give any Michelin-starred menu a run for its money. We're talking about spreads featuring delicacies like roasted pheasant and champagne jellies, dishes as extravagant as they were ephemeral. Musicians, too, played to packed rooms, their lilting notes carrying the hopes of social climbers across polished parquet floors. Yet, while these balls stimulated local businesses, they also squeezed the host's finances like a Victorian corset. Families striving to maintain appearances found themselves in a perpetual juggling act, balancing the need to impress against the risk of financial ruin. For some, hosting a ball was akin to betting the family estate on a single spin of the roulette wheel. It was a gamble that could pay off in social currency, but also leave them teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. So why did they do it? In a world where your worth was measured by the company you kept, a successful ball was your ticket to the upper echelons of society. The pressure to conform to these lavish standards was immense, particularly for those on the fringes of high society. It was a classic case of keeping up with the Joneses, or the Fitzwilliam Darcys, if you will. Let's not forget how these glitzy galas both upheld and challenged the rigid class structures of the day. On one hand, they were bastions of exclusivity, where lineage was your golden ticket and social mobility was about as likely as a snowstorm in the Sahara. On the other hand, they offered a rare arena where different classes could intersect, if only fleetingly. The nouveau rich, with pockets deep enough to rival Scrooge McDuck's vault, could buy their way into these hallowed halls, causing many an aristocratic eyebrow to arch in disdain. It was a delicate dance of old money versus new, tradition versus modernity, all played out beneath the flickering glow of gaslight chandeliers. As we strip away the tulle and taffeta, what emerges is a portrait of Victorian balls as both glamorous and absurd. Sure, they were the Instagram of their day, a platform to showcase wealth and status. But behind the facade was a reality as constricting as the corsets worn by the participants. The romanticized image of these events, a swirl of elegance and grace, belies a more complex truth. They were exercises in social maneuvering, where appearances were everything, and the stakes were as high as the powdered wigs atop the gentlemen's heads. In debunking the myth of the Victorian ball as pure glamour, we find a world where the allure of the event was inseparable from its absurdities. The relentless pursuit of perfection, the fear of social faux pas, the financial strain, it all combined to create a pressure cooker of expectation. And yet, it's this very tension that makes them so fascinating to us today. They were the original reality shows, complete with drama, intrigue, and the occasional wardrobe malfunction. So what's the legacy of these grand affairs in today's world? Well, peel back the layers of any modern social event, and you'll find echoes of the Victorian ball. The high-stakes networking, the fashion frenzy, the unspoken rules of engagement, it's all still there, just with fewer corsets and more hashtags. The balls of yesteryear set the stage for today's gala events, where the dance floor has been replaced by red carpets, but the currency of status remains the same. As we draw the curtains on this exploration of Victorian balls, it's clear that while the music may have stopped, the rhythm of social ambition continues. These events were more than just dances. They were microcosms of the era's social structures, reflecting both its opulence and its absurdities. In understanding their legacy, we gain insight into the timeless dance of human nature, a dance as eternal as the waltz itself, where ambition and appearance lead, and reality follows in their wake. If you were trying to keep up with the Joneses in ancient Rome, you wouldn't be comparing car models or kitchen gadgets. Nope, you'd be bragging about the local bathhouse. That's right, the Roman baths were the ultimate social club, gym, and spa all rolled into one. Forget about your gym membership or the latest heart yoga class. Rome had the public baths, and they were the place to be seen and get clean. Now, let's talk about the sheer ubiquity of these places. By the 4th century AD, there were over 800 public baths in Rome alone. That's right, 800. And we're not talking about some dingy, hole-in-the-wall kind of place. These were sprawling architectural masterpieces that would make even the grandest of modern spas look like a kiddie pool. For your average Roman, a trip to the bath wasn't just about scrubbing the grime of the city off your body. It was a chance to catch up on gossip, strike a business deal, or even meet a lover. Think of it as the Roman version of a coffee date, but with a whole lot more nudity. The architectural brilliance of these hubs was nothing short of breathtaking. Each bath complex was a mini-city, complete with gardens, libraries, and even art galleries. The baths of Caracalla, for instance, could accommodate up to 600 bathers at a time. That's like fitting the population of a small town into one building, all there to soak, steam, and socialize. And let's not forget the engineering genius behind it all. The Romans were masters of aqueducts and plumbing, getting water to flow uphill and piping it miles into the city. All this just so that citizens could enjoy a nice soak. Talk about dedication to hygiene. Now, if you ever find yourself time-traveling back to ancient Rome, you might want to familiarize yourself with the layout of these baths. We're divided into 3 main sections: the frigidarium, the tepidarium, and the coldarium. Sounds fancy, right? Let's break it down. The frigidarium was the cold plunge pool. After sweating it out in the harder rooms, you take a dip here to close up your pores. It's basically the ancient version of an ice bath, minus the Instagram bragging rights. The tepidarium was the warm room, a gentle transition from the heat of the coldarium, which was the hot bath. Think of it as a sauna, but with a bit more Roman flair and a lot less eucalyptus oil. The coldarium was the real showstopper. Heated floors and walls surrounded by steam would have you sweating out the stress of gladiator games and Senate scandals in no time. The Romans even had a system called the hypocaust, which involved a network of hot air tunnels under the floor, keeping everything toasty. It's like underfloor heating, but with a lot more manual labor and a side of slave-driven technology. Let's not romanticize too much, though. While the idea of lounging in a heated marble pool sounds delightful, the reality was a tad less glamorous. Hygiene wasn't exactly up to modern standards, and you can bet there were a few questionable floaties in those communal waters. Plus, with all that steam and sweat, the air was thick enough to cut with a gladius. Despite these less-than-hygienic realities, the bathhouses were truly the heart of the city. They were accessible to everyone, from the wealthiest patrician to the humblest plebeian. There was a small entrance fee, but it was affordable enough that even the average Roman could get a good soak. It wasn't just about getting clean, it was a social equalizer, a place where class lines blurred, and everyone was just a toga-less bather trying to relax. So, while we might chuckle at the idea of ancient Romans lounging around in their birthday suits, the truth is, these baths were an integral part of daily life. They were where deals were struck, friendships were formed, and occasionally political plots were hatched. The baths were a microcosm of Roman society, a place that reflected the complex social structures and the everyday hustle of life in ancient Rome. It's a shame we can't pop over for a quick soak and a history lesson, but hey, at least we can marvel at their innovation from the comfort of our modern showers. This ancient Roman bathhouse, my friend, was more than just a place to wash away the grime of the day. It was an economic and social melting pot, where the steamy air was thick with both ambition and the occasional whiff of unwashed toga. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The real beauty of these bathhouses was their accessibility. Unlike today, where a spa day can set you back the price of a small used car, Roman baths were surprisingly affordable. We're talking about an entry fee of 1 quadrans, basically the ancient equivalent of a couple of pennies. For this pocket change, you got access to facilities that would make today's luxury spas green with envy. Now, you might be wondering, if the baths were so cheap, who actually went there? The short answer: everyone who was anyone, or rather, everyone who was anyone naked. From patricians in their prime to plebeians just trying to get by, the baths were a social equalizer, where the only status symbol was how well you could hold a conversation while sweating. And don't forget the slaves, who, though not exactly enjoying the same luxuries, were there to work and sometimes snatch a quick soak for themselves if their masters were feeling generous. But don't let the low price tag fool you into thinking the baths were some egalitarian utopia. Sure, the entrance fee was a pittance, but who you rubbed shoulders or elbows with could make a big difference. The bathhouse was a place where the rigid Roman social hierarchy could be both challenged and reinforced. Imagine a senator schmoozing with a wealthy merchant, or a retired centurion swapping stories with a curious young philosopher. The steam blurred class lines just enough to make the encounters interesting. It was like a modern networking event, only with more dampness and fewer business cards. And let's talk about the economic implications. The baths weren't just social hubs. They were economic engines that pumped life into the local economy. Bathhouses created jobs. Attendants, masseurs, and food vendors all made their living catering to the bathers. Even the guys maintaining the hypocaust system, the ancient version of a boiler room technician, had steady work. The bathhouses were bustling hubs of commerce, with vendors selling snacks like honey cakes and mulled wine to keep bathers fueled for hours of gossip and relaxation. Now, if you think our modern-day social media influencers invented the art of the humble brag, think again. The Romans were doing it centuries ago, albeit without the Instagram filters. A visit to the baths wasn't just about soaking. It was about seeing and being seen. The more important you were, the more likely you were to be spotted lounging in the caldarium, surrounded by a retinue of admirers and hangers-on. You didn't just show up. You made an entrance, preferably in a well-draped toga that implied both wealth and taste. People would talk about the who's who of the bathhouse much like they discuss the latest TikTok drama today. And let's not forget the role of gossip. The baths were a veritable cauldron of rumors and whispers. If you wanted to know who was up in the Senate or who was out in the gladiatorial arena, the baths were your one-stop shop for all the latest news. In a way, they were the ancient equivalent of a Twitter feed, unfiltered, full of hot takes, and sometimes not entirely accurate. In this steamy hothouse of interaction, societal norms were both observed and stretched. Bathgoers were expected to adhere to a loose code of conduct, much like the unwritten rules of social media today. Yes, nudity was the norm, but decorum dictated how you carried yourself, literally and figuratively. Lounging too casually or engaging in overly boisterous behavior could be frowned upon, unless, of course, you had the status to pull it off. It was a delicate dance of etiquette, one where the steps were murky, but the consequences of misstepping clear. So, while we might chuckle at the thought of toga-clad Romans sweating it out in communal hot tubs, these bathhouses were more than just places to wash up. They were arenas of influence, where life in the rawest sense of the word unfolded. From political machinations to romantic dalliances, the baths were a reflection of Roman society, messy, hierarchical, and full of ambition. They were places where the pulse of the city could be felt, where the ambitions of its people were laid bare as surely as their unclothed bodies. The baths were, quite literally, a hotbed of activity, and they remain, to this day, one of the most fascinating windows into the everyday life of ancient Rome. So, while we might not be able to queue up for a caldarium session, we can still marvel at how these ancient institutions were the original social networks. Long before the digital age was even a gleam in history's eye. Amidst the steam and chatter of Roman bathhouses, you might think it was all about indulgence, but let's peel back the marble veneer and get into the gritty details of what made these engineering marvels tick. The Romans didn't just stumble upon these architectural wonders. They engineered them with the precision of a Swiss watch, albeit with a bit more slave labor and a lot less Timex branding. First up, let's talk aqueducts, the unsung heroes that made Roman baths possible. Imagine trying to run a bathhouse without water. It's like trying to open a cafe without coffee. The Romans knew this, and they mastered the art of water logistics better than Amazon Prime handles your deliveries. By the height of the Roman Empire, there were 11 aqueducts feeding the city of Rome, channeling a mind-boggling 200 million gallons of water a day. That's enough to fill about 300 Olympic swimming pools every single day. Talk about a splash zone. These aqueducts weren't just glorified gutters. They were architectural masterpieces, with some stretching over 50 miles to bring fresh water from distant sources into the city. The Aqua Claudia, for instance, was completed in 52 AD and could transport water from springs over 45 miles away, across valleys and through mountains, all with a gradient so slight you'd think it was designed by a perfectionist with a ruler obsession. The Romans understood that gravity was the best free labor, and they used it to their full advantage, letting water flow downhill with the grace of a ballerina in ballet flats. But let's not pretend this was all carried out by toga-clad engineers with perfect teeth and a penchant for geometry. The construction of these aqueducts was a monumental task that involved thousands of workers, often slaves and soldiers, who toiled under the hot Mediterranean sun. Imagine the sweat, the grit, the sheer human effort that went into chiseling stone, laying bricks, and maintaining these colossal structures. And all this to make sure that every Roman, from Caesar to the average citizen, could enjoy a good soak and some steamy gossip. Now, onto the hypocaust system, the ancient equivalent of central heating, but with a distinctly Roman twist. This ingenious setup involved a network of tunnels and pillars beneath the bathhouse floors, where hot air from furnaces circulated to keep the baths toasty. Picture a gigantic underfloor heating system, but instead of flicking a switch, you needed a team of slaves to keep the fires burning around the clock. It's a bit like having a wood-burning stove in every room of your house, minus the rustic charm, and plus a lot of manual labor. The hypocaust was a testament to Roman ingenuity, but it was also a reminder of the empire's reliance on an abundant labor force. The cost of such a system wasn't just measured in denarii, but in human sweat and effort. This brings us to a critical point, debunking the myth of Rome as a self-sufficient monolith. The grandeur of Roman engineering was not a solo act. It was a collaboration of resources, labor, and often the spoils of conquest. The raw materials, the labor force, the knowledge, these were all drawn from the far reaches of the empire, a reminder that Rome wasn't built in a day, nor was it built alone. Now, let's address the notion of these baths as mere leisure spots. Sure, they were places to unwind, but they were also arenas of influence and power plays. Roman baths were strategic hubs in urban planning, placed at the heart of cities as symbols of Roman hospitality and might. They were statements of civic pride, designed to impress both citizens and visitors with the empire's ability to harness nature for comfort and luxury. The baths also played a subtle but significant role in politics. While the Senate might have been the official seat of power, the baths were where the real deals went down. Senators and political hopefuls didn't just come to wash away the grime of a long day. They came to curry favor, broker alliances, and seal agreements over a shared soak. It was a political arena where the water was warm and the stakes were high. And let's not forget the economic ripple effect. The construction and maintenance of these bathhouses created a microeconomy, from the quarrymen who extracted the marble to the craftsmen who installed intricate mosaics. Then there were the local merchants and vendors who thrived on the bustling trade around these social hubs. The Roman bathhouses were economic engines, driving commerce and labor in every city they graced. In the end, while we might romanticize the image of Romans lounging in opulent baths, the reality was a complex web of engineering brilliance, economic strategy, and political maneuvering. The baths were more than just havens of leisure. They were reflections of Roman society's ambitions and contradictions. So next time you find yourself soaking in your modern bathtub, remember the intricate dance of engineering and empire that once made such a simple pleasure possible. It's a testament to the lengths humans will go to combine comfort with influence, a pursuit that seems as timeless as the Roman aqueducts themselves. But let's not get too dreamy-eyed about this ancient Roman spa day. We need to dive into the murkier waters of what these baths were really like. Time to peel back the layers of steam and marble and get to the nitty-gritty reality. First, let's tackle the hygiene myth. You see, the Romans weren't exactly the poster children for cleanliness, at least not by our standards. Sure, they had aqueducts and hypocausts, but let's not confuse technological prowess with germophobia. If you're picturing sparkling clean pools with water that glistens like a mountain spring, think again. These communal baths were more like soup kettles of humanity, everyone tossing in their own special flavor. With hundreds of bodies and probably more than a few questionable hygiene practices, these places were hotbeds of potential infection. And let's get real about the soap, or lack thereof. Forget about your fragrant, antibacterial hand wash. Romans used a substance called *strigil* to scrape off dirt and sweat. Imagine a curved metal tool, almost like a dull butter knife, that you drag over your skin. It's exfoliation, Roman style, and not for the faint-hearted. It's like your skin care regimen decided to go rogue and start a revolution against softness. So, what about all those healing properties we associate with Roman baths? The idea that these baths were medicinal wonderlands is a bit of a stretch. Sure, a nice soak could ease your aching joints, but don't expect any miracles. The notion that these baths were some kind of ancient health spa is mostly modern romanticism. In reality, you were just as likely to leave with a suntan as you were with a rash. Now, let's talk about the water quality, or lack thereof. The idea of pristine, crystal-clear baths is as fictional as a unicorn. These pools weren't drained and cleaned regularly. Water was expensive and hard to replace, even with those fancy aqueducts. So it was more like a weekly, or even monthly, change-out if you were lucky. Imagine that the water was infused with a week's worth of human essence by the time you got in. And what about the air? If you think the steamy atmosphere was akin to a modern spa's eucalyptus-scented ambience, think again. The air was thick, muggy, and probably smelled like a combination of sweat, oil, and whatever else people were trying to wash off. If you were hoping for a breath of fresh air, you'd be holding your breath longer than you might in a public restroom today. Let's not forget the company you'd keep in these baths. The class lines blurred, sure, but the social dynamics were not as egalitarian as we might wish. The baths were as much about pecking order as they were about pecking dirt. If you were a high-status Roman, you'd have your entourage to help maintain your dignity. If you were a lowly plebeian, you were just hoping you didn't get called out for scrubbing the wrong way. Imagine trying to maintain your social standing while quite literally naked, vulnerable, and possibly being stared at by everyone else in the room. The baths were also a hotbed of gossip, but not always the innocent kind. Information was currency, and if you had a juicy tidbit, you could trade it for favors or status. It was a game of verbal chess played in the nude, and the stakes could be high. You could gain a powerful ally or make a dangerous enemy with a single overheard whisper. But let's not ignore the allure of the myth. The idea of Romans lounging in luxury, mingling in a utopia of marble and steam, has captured imaginations for generations. There's something undeniably appealing about the vision of a society where even the humblest citizen could rub shoulders, or elbows, with the elite. It's a romantic notion of unity and accessibility, even if the reality was a bit more stratified and grimy. The baths were a paradox, a symbol of both Roman engineering brilliance and the gritty realities of ancient life. They were places where comfort and convenience met the raw, unvarnished truth of human existence. And while we might daydream about reclining in a Roman bath, basking in the glory of empire, let's not forget the less than glamorous side of the story. In the end, these baths reflect the complexity of Roman society itself. They were places of social interaction, economic activity, and political maneuvering, wrapped in the guise of communal hygiene. They were a testament to Roman innovation and a reminder of the empire's reliance on the labor of many for the luxury of a few. So next time you're relaxing in your own bath, think of it as a tribute to the Romans, minus the communal germs and strigal scrapes. It's a small reminder of how far we've come and how much we owe to those ancient engineers, dreamers and schemers who shaped the world with aqueducts and ambition. Stay tuned, because the story of Roman baths is far from over, and there's plenty more steam to unravel. And so, as the steam begins to clear, and the echoes of splashing water fade into the annals of history, we find ourselves at the tail end of this ancient Roman spa day. But what happens when the bathhouses go cold, when the fountains run dry, and an empire known for its opulent aquatic institutions begins to crumble? The decline of the Roman baths tells a story not just of lost luxury, but of a civilization grappling with its own grandeur and eventual downfall. By the 5th century AD, the Roman Empire was like a once-celebrated celebrity facing a public meltdown. Invasions, economic turmoil, and a leadership structure that was about as stable as a house of cards in a wind tunnel all played their part. As the Goths and Vandals came knocking at Rome's gates in 410 AD, they didn't just make off with the city's treasures. They disrupted the very infrastructure that kept the baths running. Those legendary aqueducts, sabotaged or neglected, they ceased to deliver the lifeblood of the public baths. Without water, the social epicenters of Roman life became nothing more than cold, echoing shells of their former selves. The collapse of these institutions mirrored the fragmentation of the empire itself. Imagine a city built on the promise of opulence and social mingling, suddenly stripped of its communal heart. As these baths closed, so too did the forums of social and political discourse they facilitated. The fall of the baths was not just a loss of leisure, but a fracture in the societal glue that held the bustling, unruly city together. In essence, the decline of Roman baths was the canary in the coal mine, heralding the collapse of urban life as the Romans knew it. But let's not just leave it there, wallowing in the ruins like a washed-up emperor. The legacy of the Roman baths didn't just sink into oblivion with the fall of Rome. It seeped into the very fabric of modern culture. Fast forward a few centuries, and you'll find that the medieval Europeans were initially skeptical about the whole bathing thing. Yet, the allure of Roman innovation was too potent to ignore forever. By the time the Renaissance rolled around, the spirit of the Roman baths was reincarnated into the Turkish hammams and the spa towns that dotted Europe, places like Bath in England, where the Romans themselves had once soaked. The Roman baths taught us that public spaces could be more than just practical. They could be palatial, inviting, and deeply intertwined with the social fabric of life. In today's urban planning, we see echoes of this in our public parks, community centers, and yes, even modern spas. The idea that a city should have spaces where people can gather, relax, and engage in a bit of social espionage. Networking is as Roman as it gets. Yet, there's a lesson to be heeded here. The grandeur of the Roman baths was built on the backs of an empire that stretched its resources thin and relied heavily on a labor force that was, let's say, less than voluntarily conscripted. It's a stark reminder of the limits of expansion and the dangers of neglecting infrastructure. When those aqueducts stopped flowing, they took with them the lifeblood of Roman urban life, a warning that urban planners today would do well to remember. Maintain the infrastructure of your city, or watch it crumble like a poorly balanced Jenga tower. And let's not romanticize too deeply the idea of the baths as a utopia of social equality. While they blurred some class lines, they were still a reflection of a society deeply entrenched in hierarchy and power struggles. The very fact that they could fade into obsolescence so swiftly highlights how fragile such social constructs can be when the underpinnings are not as solid as marble columns. In our modern world, we can appreciate the Romans' knack for creating spaces that were not only functional but fostered community, something we still aspire to today. From the bustling markets of Marrakesh to New York's Central Park, the spirit of the Roman bathhouse lives on in spaces where people from all walks of life can come together. Yet, as we sip our overpriced lattes in these urban oases, let's remember the lessons of history. Public spaces must be maintained, cherished, and most importantly, accessible to all, lest they become relics of past glory hidden beneath the sands of time. So, as we conclude this journey through the steamy past of Roman baths, let's raise a proverbial glass, or strigil, to the Romans. They may not have invented relaxation, but they certainly gave it a grand stage. And while those ancient pools have long since dried up, their influence ripples through time, reminding us that the essence of civilization is often found in how we come together, even when we're just trying to wash the day away. Here's to the Romans, their baths, and the timeless pursuit of a good soak in the company of friends.